Down from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The Committee on Education and Labor will come to order. Welcome, everyone. I know the quorum is present. The committee is now meeting today to hear testimony on examining the policies and priorities of the U.S. Department of Labor. This is a hybrid hearing pursuant to House Resolution 8 and the regulations thereto, and all microphones, both in the room and on the platform, should be kept muted as a general rule to avoid unnecessary background noise. Members and witnesses will be responsible for unmuting themselves when they are recognized to speak or when they wish to seek recognition. When members wish to speak or seek recognition, they should unmute themselves and allow a pause of 2 seconds to ensure that the microphone picks up their speech. I also ask that members please identify themselves before they speak. Members who are participating in person should not be logged on into a remote platform to avoid feedback, echoes, and distortion. Members participating remotely shall be considered present in the proceeding when they are visible on camera, and they shall be considered not present when they're not visible on camera. The only exception to this is if you're experiencing technical difficulties, and inform the committee staff of such difficulty. If any member experiences technical difficulty during the hearing, you should stay connected on the platform, make sure you're muted, and use your phone to immediately contact the committee's IT director, whose number was provided in advance. Should the chair need to step away for any reason, another majority member is hereby authorized to assume the gavel in the chair's absence. In order to ensure the committee's 5-minute rule is adhered to, staff will be keeping track of time using the committee's digital timer on the remote platform. For members participating in person, the timer will be broadcast in the committee room on the television monitor as part of the platform gallery view and visible in its own thumbnail window. The committee room timer will not be in use. For members participating remotely, this will be visible in gallery view in its own thumbnail window on the remote platform. Members are asked to wrap up promptly when their time has expired. Finally, while recent guidance from the Office of Attending Physician has made mask wearing optional this time, please know that we have in our midst, both at the member and staff level, individuals who are immunocompromised and or have immediate family members who are immunocompromised, and we ask you to govern yourselves accordingly. Pursuant to House Rule 8C, opening statements are limited to the chair and ranking member, so I recognize myself for the purpose of an opening statement. Today we're meeting to discuss the Department of Labor's budget request for the fiscal year 2023. Secretary Walsh, I thank you for being with us today and look forward to hearing your vision to help all workers and their families succeed in our economy. I want to begin by reflecting on how far we have come in our economic recovery during the Biden-Harris administration. 2 years ago, in May of 2020, our nation's unemployment rate was 13.2%. By May 2021, the unemployment rate had fallen to 5.8%, thanks largely to the congressional Democrats and President Biden's American Rescue Plan. And by last month, it had fallen to 3.6%. Since President Biden took office in January 21, the economy has added nearly 8.7 million jobs. In fact, 2021 saw the largest job growth in modern history. This historic recovery is not by happenstance. It was connected to President Biden and congressional Democrats' leadership, and thanks to the administration's comprehensive efforts to mitigate COVID-19 and the American Rescue Plan, 221 million Americans have been fully vaccinated, allowing workers to return to safer workplaces. Also, through the American Rescue Plan, we saved more than 1 million retirees' hard-earned pensions through the Multi-Employer Pension Fund. Had we not acted, pensions would have failed. Workers and retirees, from truckers to bricklayers, would have lost nearly everything they'd worked to save, and many participating employers would have been forced to close or cut jobs because they were legally obligated to pay those pensions until the businesses went broke. While these steps are significant, our progress has not been limited to just rebounding from the pandemic. I'm pleased to see that the administration shares the committee's commitment to advancing workers' rights and preparing workers to compete in the modern economy. Last September, the administration took a critical step to put money back into workers' pockets by increasing the federal minimum wage for federal contract and subcontract workers. As a result, nearly 400,000 low-wage workers received a much-needed raise. Last April, President Biden signed an executive order to create a task force dedicated to promoting worker organizing and collective bargaining. The task force's recommendations, coupled with increased investments in the department's sub-agencies, will help ensure that all workers can be empowered to build a better life for themselves and their families. In addition, the department's Good Jobs initiatives and the budget's sizable increase in workforce development programs will help ensure that businesses can fill job openings with qualified candidates. Simply put, as evidenced by a year and a half of progress in the President's budget request, the Biden-Harris administration is the most pro-worker administration in history. However, I recognize that our economic progress is clouded by the rising costs of everyday goods that are impacting people around the world. I applaud the President for communicating a clear and responsible plan to address global inflation. Similarly, House Democrats continue to advance legislation that will help bring down costs for America's workers and family. For example, in March, House passed legislation that would cap out-of-pocket insurance costs for insulin users to $35 a month, slashing the average cost for patients nearly in half, and for many, a much more significant reduction. Regrettably, this was not unanimous, and the overwhelming majority of Republicans opposed it. Last month, the House passed legislation that would help lower costs for consumers at the gas pump by putting an end to price gouging. Every House Republican opposed that legislation. This week, the House is expected to consider legislation to lower food costs at the grocery aisle by strengthening the food supply chain and ensuring robust competition in the meat and poultry sectors. One of the most important steps that Congress can take to ease global inflation and strengthen our supply chains is for the House and Senate to reach an agreement on a bipartisan innovation bill that retains the key worker provisions in the House-passed Competes Act. I anticipate that we may hear some comments from our colleagues on the other side about rising costs. We share those concerns, and that is why we've been advancing responsible bills that I mentioned and others to lower costs for working people. But merely identifying the problem and levying criticism without also offering credible solutions is not constructive, and it certainly doesn't constitute a plan. Any comment from Republicans about global inflation should be met with one simple question: what's the plan to address it? The bottom line is that as lawmakers, we must continue to improve the lives of workers and their families. Over the past year and a half, congressional Democrats have done exactly that, leading to one of the strongest economic recoveries in history. Businesses are open. Job market is booming. Wages are rising. Pensions have been saved, and workers are safer on the job. And I'm confident that together we can work to address the challenges facing families and continue to build an economy where everyone can succeed. So thank you, Secretary Walsh, for your time, and I look forward to your discussion. And I now recognize the distinguished ranking member of the committee, Dr. Fox, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This Labor Department is up a creek without a paddle. The Biden administration's policies have created a worker shortage, record high inflation, an environment of uncertainty for employers, and fewer choices for job seekers. The Department of Labor's response to these crises drag our country further from solutions that will help the American people. One of the biggest problems with this DOL is its obvious union favoritism. In fact, this department has bowed low enough before union bosses to taste dirt. How many times has the Biden administration's DOL kowtowed before union bosses instead of standing up for workers? Let me count the ways. First, the DOL keeps attacking the nearly 19 million Americans who choose to act as independent contractors. Why? Because it's harder to put independent contractors under the thumb of union bosses or DOL's army of regulators. The American people are capable of choosing how they want to work without Washington bureaucrats butting in. Second, the White House Task Force on Worker Organization and Empowerment, vice-chaired by Secretary Walsh, is attempting to bypass Congress to implement PRO Act policies through executive fiat. The so-called Protecting the Right to Organize Act is an attack on workers' rights and privacy, not to mention a massive Washington power grab. By negating right-to-work laws in 27 states, the PRO Act would force more workers to give their paychecks to big labor, which spends more on left-wing special interests than on worker representation. Third, the DOL proposed an egregious Davis-Bacon regulatory change that uses an outdated prevailing wage definition from decades past to favor union wage rates. This rule change will disadvantage non-union construction workers bidding for federal contracts and lead to skyrocketing costs of federal construction to projects. On the note of federal contractors, your proposal to rescind the Trump administration's rule protecting religious organizations seeking federal contracts is appalling. Faith-based organizations should be able to bid for federal contracts without fear of having to compromise their religious identity or mission. In all these ways, DOL favors unions with proposals and policies that will leave workers with less freedom, less flexibility, and fewer opportunities. By undermining the right of the American people to enter into contracts and to choose when, where, and how to work, the Biden DOL undermines the functioning of a free society and a robust workforce. And these are just some of the ways the DOL has favored unions above American job creators and workers. DOL is also actively implementing plans that favor so-called environmental justice over retirees and workers saving for retirement. As inflation is eroding the spending power of retirees' fixed income and harming current workers' abilities to save, DOL is proposing to direct retirement plan fiduciaries to consider environmental and social factors when selecting and monitoring investments. This focus on left-wing social policy hinders retirement plan fiduciaries from maximizing the financial return on workers' and retirees' investments. Mr. Secretary, you said in your statement that you're proud of what your department has accomplished this year. I notice you didn't mention the illegal COVID-19 vaccine and testing emergency temporary standard OSHA issued, the mandate that would have cost many hardworking Americans their jobs and would have worsened the worker shortage. Are you proud of this tyrannical mandate? Since you've requested a budgetary increase of nearly 50% to OSHA's office in charge of devising and writing regulations, it seems that you're proud of its work. How out of touch. I'd also like to know if you're proud of OSHA's predatory actions against job creators. OSHA continuously chooses to punish job creators rather than empower them to comply with federal guidance. And we know that this trend will continue as your budget requests an 18% increase for enforcement measures and a mere 1% increase for a program assisting small businesses in complying with OSHA regulations. Further, DOL has proposed a rule to end flexibility for employment service staffing models funded through the Wagner-Pfizer Act. This will have serious consequences for numerous states that use private sector employees, local public sector merit staff, or other staffing models to administer services for job seekers and employers, such as job placement and recruitment. This rule will only do harm, increasing costs at a time of already record high inflation and removing a crucial tool states use to hire staff who deliver these critical services to job seekers. Lastly, the skills gap is fueling the current worker shortage. But instead of making the workforce system more responsive to employer needs, the Biden administration has doubled down on burdensome registered apprenticeships while shuttering the industry-recognized apprenticeship program. This is not something to be proud of. With this kind of record, I'm astonished that you have the gall to come here and ask Congress to increase your budget. Mr. Secretary, we're not that dense. We know that you would use a $1.6 billion budgetary increase to write more onerous regulations, to grow DOL's full-time staff by nearly 10%, and to enhance DOL's capacity to litigate against employers. We will not endorse more of the same policies that have been failing our country. We've already seen that your policies will not work. They will not create more jobs. They will not fill the skills gap. They will not help our economy recover, and they will not bring inflation down. Republicans, on the other hand, have an agenda that will foster a strong economy, remove unnecessary regulations, give Americans the chance to upskill, and empower businesses to create more jobs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. And without objection, all other members who wish to insert written statements to the record may do so by submitting them to the committee clerk electronically in Microsoft Word format by 5 p.m. on June 28, 2022. I will now introduce the witness. The Honorable Martin Walsh is the 29th Secretary of the Department of Labor. He previously served almost 17 years in the Massachusetts House of Representatives and 7 years as Mayor of Boston. He also served as President of Laborers Union Local 223 and was head of Boston Building Trades. He's also, as I understand it, a season ticket holder of the New England Patriots for almost 30 years. Mr. Secretary, we appreciate you participating today and look forward to your testimony. Your written statement will appear in full at the hearing record, and you're asked to limit your oral presentation to 5-minute summary. After your presentation, we'll move to member questions. I'm sure you're aware of your responsibility to provide accurate information to the committee, and therefore we'll proceed directly with your testimony. Secretary Walsh, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Chairman Scott and Ranking Member Fox and members of the committee today. I want to thank you for inviting me to testify here in this hearing. I'm certainly pleased and honored to outline the Biden-Harris administration's priorities for the Department of Labor's fiscal year 2023. My mission as Secretary of Labor, and quite honestly, my mission as in all my roles I've ever held, is to empower workers, all workers, morning, noon, and night. The frontline workers who carried us through the worst days of the pandemic, who continue to carry us through the pandemic. The marginalized workers who face barriers to employment and opportunity. The veterans who serve proudly our nation. The rural workers served through targeted workforce training grants. The Department of Labor stands with all workers in every community to build a stronger, more resilient, and inclusive economy for all. I certainly am very proud of all of the Department of Labor's accomplishments in the past year. We implemented key provisions of the President's American Rescue Plan, supporting health care, pensions, and unemployment insurance. We protected workers from COVID-19 and heat exposure. We strengthened retirement security and access to mental health services and continue to do every day. We expand career training programs to connect more Americans to opportunity. We connect more industries with skilled workers. We implemented the President's $15 an hour minimum wage for federal contractors, legislation to stop surprise billing, protections for tip workers. We advanced government-wide initiatives to support workers' organizing rights, climate action, and infrastructure implementation. In all of our work, we are committed to equity for the most vulnerable workers in communities all across America in your districts. And we have, in this moment, a unique opportunity to help all workers thrive. The President's plans have produced historic job recovery. Congress has made major investments in workers through the Bipartisan infrastructure law. In the Department of Labor's Good Job Initiative, we are partnering across the government to make sure these investments create good jobs and access for all people. And I'm committed to supporting congressional efforts to invest in the workforce, training, child support, education, and health care that working families need and depend upon. In the 2023 budget submission builds on these investments and renews our pledge to serve workers, job seekers, and retirees in America. Workforce development is a vitally important area of opportunity. High-quality job training programs lift workers into the middle class and increase equity in each of our economies. These programs meet the talent needs of employers and strengthen our supply chain. That's why this budget requests $303 million to expand registered apprenticeships because they're proven successful. $100 million for career training in growing industry sectors. $100 million for community college partnerships with employers. I have visited community colleges in dozens of states. I have visited Job Corps centers all across this country. I see innovation programs designed in collaboration with employers working with students of all backgrounds. We need to invest in these partnerships and reach out to more employers. We need to provide more workers with better opportunities. This budget also increases funding for veterans through our Veterans Employment and Training Service Agency. And it increases funding our Women's Bureau to expand access for women's careers where they are underrepresented. This budget invests $2.2 billion in the department's worker protection agencies. They're worker protection agencies. This work is more essential than ever as we rebuild our staffing levels. That includes OSHA's efforts to double the number of inspectors by the end of the President's first term. It would restore MSHA's capacity for enforcement in mine plan and equipment review. It would restore staffing at our Employment Benefit Security Administration to protect workers' health, retirement, and disabilities benefits. It would increase funding for our Wage and Hour Division to safeguard wages of vulnerable workers. It would fund the Office of Federal Contract Compliance programs to ensure federal contracting advances America's promise for fairness for all workers. This budget increases funding to the Office of Labor Solicitor, rebuilding the entire department's capacity to enforce the laws that you pass. We're also requiring resources for the Bureau of International Labor Affairs. Ilab ensures our training partners uphold the labor commitments so American workers can compete on a level playing field. The budget fully funds and updates the state funding formulas for unemployment insurance. This would be the first comprehensive update in decades. It allows states to serve claimants more effectively. And our request includes $150 million to strengthen the integrity of our system. Finally, the budget requests $4 million to support the Good Jobs Initiative. This enables us to advance the President's priority of good jobs with the free and fair choice to join a union if people want to. I see it everywhere I travel. Workers are showing up each and every day to move our communities and our nation forward. In return, we must do all we can to ensure their well-being and empower them with the opportunity. I want to thank each and every one of you for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to discussing the budget requests with the committee and with the members of this committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Under Committee Rule 9A, we'll now question the witness under the 5-minute rule, and I'll be recognizing committee members in order of seniority. And now recognize the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Secretary. Thank you for your testimony. I want to go back to your point about the fact that we actually are at a moment of opportunity right now with the number of job openings that are in the U.S. economy. It's estimated there's 2 openings for every unemployed person. One of the biggest challenges is closing the skill gap for many of those job openings. You talked about the registered apprenticeship funding, the Fitzgerald Act program, which, as you said, is tried and true. Can you talk about what the department's sort of focus is going to be in terms of trying to extend that help to, again, underrepresented groups who have not, who would, I think, be the ones that would benefit the most from expanding registered apprenticeships?
Thank you, Congressman. You know, as I go around the country and I visit districts and businesses, I talk to businesses every day, and they talk about the need for hiring people, and they talk about the need for workforce development, and they talk about the need for skilling people up. people that might have worked in a different industry, that they left the industry for the salary, or they left their industry for a particular reason, and they're looking for another skill. And I'll just give two quick stories. One, when I was in your district at Electric Boat, we had the opportunity to see young people that worked at Job Corps, that came out of Job Corps, that were welders. They had an opportunity to work at Electric Boat and see the expansion that's happening at Electric Boat, and seeing the opportunity to create pathways in there for young people of color in Connecticut, the opportunity to get into those good paying jobs, an opportunity to raise their family moving forward. Another one, I was with Congressman Cole a couple weeks ago down in Oklahoma at Tinker Air Force Base. And again, we were talking about the need to expand opportunities, the job openings that were happening in electrical engineering, and mechanical engineering, and welding, and places like that, and talking about the opportunity. How do we partner with not just our armed services, but how do we partner more with businesses in America to create that pathway into good-paying jobs? There's a will for that. I've done it in my whole career. I continue to do it as a Secretary of Labor. That's why we're asking for increases in workforce development money. That's why we asked for the WIOA reauthorization. That's why we're making these different investments. Is really, we're at a unique moment in time where we're skilling workers up and helping workers that want to get in a better position, creating those pathways into good paying jobs. We have a huge opportunity for people of color and women and young people of color in our country right now. The unemployment rate in America is 3.6%. The unemployment rate in the black community is 3.4%, excuse me, the unemployment rate in America, 6.2% in the African American community. We should do better than that.
Thank you. And, to go back to your point about Electric Boat, this year's hiring target is 3,600 new hires. And again, the registered apprenticeship program and the pre-apprenticeship program, 10 weeks, you're hireable as a welder, and then you, again, then transition into the full registered apprenticeship program. So far this year, they've increased the number of Hispanic workers at EB by 19%. So it shows that, again, that's where I think the opportunity is to really expand opportunity for people.
If you don't mind, Congress, I'll just take 30 seconds. I don't want to take your time. I was in Germany a couple weeks ago, and we were at Volkswagen. And there was 16, 17, 18-year-old young people there as apprentices, learning how to code, learning how the technology of the future, and creating a pathway into good-paying jobs. That's an apprentice program that works. We have programs in this country, apprentice programs that works in the building trades, through Trucking Challenge, and other ways. We want to expand those opportunities into other industries, into the tech sector, into the biotech sector, into sectors that need help. There's opportunities. We just don't have to look that far across the Atlantic Ocean and see so much success in apprenticeship programs in so many different industries. We should be taking some of those models here in the United States.
Great, thank you. In my last minute here, on June 1st at St. Francis Hospital in Tulsa, Oklahoma, 4 individuals were killed in gun violence. Again, irate patient who came in to complain about problems in his care, and it's another example of where, again, healthcare workplace is still the site of the highest level of violence for workers. Again, I know your department is moving forward on the OSHA standard, and again, when you talk about the need to bolster the workforce there of your OSHA programs, I mean, it's precisely to make sure that we get these types of rules through the process quicker. It's a life and death situation. We passed the bill, obviously, in the House, which the president endorsed. Maybe, again, 10 seconds or so on that issue.
Yeah, I had 3 weeks ago in the Department of Labor, we had the Nurses In for Nurses Week, and the violence against nurses is up 20% this year. So we're taking these issues very seriously, both the violence again in the workplace, but also, and we'll talk a little later about the heat standards.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Yields back. The ranking member of the full committee, Dr. Fox, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, your written testimony did not mention the word inflation, but I will. On Friday, the Bureau of Labor Statistics had bad news for consumers and retirees, but it confirmed what consumers are already feeling. Over the last 12 months, inflation increased 8.6%. The largest 12-month increase in more than 40 years. Energy prices are up 34.6%. Food prices are up 10.1%. Shelter prices up 5.5%. The price of new vehicles up 12.6%. And the price of used cars and trucks up 16.1%. With inflation running rampant and squeezing families, workers, small businesses, and retirees, what is DOL doing to ensure new regulations and the large increase in spending it is requesting will not exacerbate inflation?
Thank you, Ranking Member Fox. There's no question that inflation is causing pain for families in America. And that's why the president certainly has been very focused on lowering the costs that families face and reduce the federal deficit as well. We're making real progress, but quite honestly, the inflation issue that we're dealing with in the United States of America is not just being dealt with in the United States of America, it's being dealt with all across the globe. What we're doing what I'm doing at the Department of Labor is working we're number one on the supply chain issues to get more goods and services into our country. Part of the inflation is due to lack of goods and supplies coming into this country in the early days of the pandemic. We're working with across agency lines to bring the cost of inflation down. I think that we can't ignore the fact that inflation was not caused by President Joe Biden. The inflation was not caused by the American Rescue Plan, and the inflation will not be exacerbated by making other investments in job training, workforce development, worker protections. What we have to do, we have a war in Ukraine, and we're still dealing with a global pandemic.
Mr. Secretary. I think we strongly disagree on the fact that this is not being caused by the Biden administration and the American Rescue Plan. Definitely those are the issues. Even Democrats are saying that. Mr. Secretary, on October 27, you participated in strike activity at Kellogg's plant in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Your one-sided participation on behalf of the union in this strike was inappropriate. As Secretary of Labor, you have an obligation to demonstrate impartiality in both appearance and in form. I've twice written to you about this matter and have yet to receive a written response. I'll ask you again, did you seek ethics advice from DOL's attorney prior to your visit to Kellogg plant, yes or no?
Well, I will tell you, I did go out to the Kellogg to talk to the workers. I went out there to try and be helpful.
Mr. Secretary,
And
did you seek attorney's advice?
Of course I did.
That's all I need to know.
Of course I did.
Okay, and so will you provide me any written guidance or advice you received on the legality of this visit or your ethical obligations related to the visit?
I'll also give you information on the conversation I had with the CEO of Kellogg last week.
Okay. Will you commit to respond comprehensively in writing all the questions in my previous 2 letters by the end of this week?
I don't know what the questions are in your letter.
Okay, we've given them to you. We can send it again.
Okay, thank you.
The Office of Secretary General published a report earlier this year that reviewed the Education and Training Administration spending over the past 10 years and found that upwards of $489 billion in grant funds intended for workforce development were inefficiently used. The OIG expressed 3 ongoing areas of concern in how ETA is handling taxpayer dollars, including how the agency is awarding grants, reviewing grantees' use of funds, and measuring grantee performance. Any misuse of hard-earned taxpayer dollars is always unacceptable. We're in the middle of job crisis, and we must ensure money is being put to its proper use so that we can close the skills gap and get Americans back to work. What steps is ETA taking to ensure grant applicants' proposals meet all program solicitation requirements?
Yeah, I can't speak to what happened 8.5 years ago as far as the grants, but I'll look into that for you and get back to you on that. But I can tell you, our team at ETA is working extremely hard to make sure that we're getting as many grant applications through the process and we're getting the funding to those applicants, because right now, this moment in time, as you alluded to in your opening statement.
But what we need to know is that the money is being used for their intended purposes. Getting the money out the door is one thing, but getting accountability is even more important.
I was going to get there. My point is, we make sure we follow up with the grant applicants. That's something that I've demanded responses from my team to make sure that every dollar that we're spending of taxpayers' dollars in America is getting spent in the proper way.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from the Northern Mariana Islands, Mr. Sablon.
All right. Yeah, good morning. Good morning, Chairman Scott. And welcome, Mr. Secretary. Secretary Walsh, wage theft is a pervasive problem throughout the country. But my question is how many immigrants who obtain a visa to come to the United States to work are victims of wage theft, and too often this issue is overlooked. I'd like to ask you if the department is paying enough attention to this serious problem. Reporting has shown, for example, that the department's closed cases increased only slightly from 424 cases in 2011 to 478 in 2019. Over the same period, however, the total number of these annual workers' visas has leaped from 106,000 to 302,000. So I am concerned that there are many workers facing wage debt who will never see those illegally stolen wages returned. Or maybe the department is doing something so well that this issue is becoming to get into control. But could you please explain why has the number of closed cases remained consistent from 2011 to 2019, despite the fact that so many additional employers are hiring and reaping benefits from these workers?
Thank you, Congressman. Let me just address this two ways. In 2021, the Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division recovered more than $230 million in back wages for over 190,000 workers all across America. Last year, in one of the responses that we had to that 2021 and going back, the Department of Labor held over 4,700 outreach events involving 179,000 participants. What we're trying to do is to let people know, understand what their rights are, and that the Department of Labor Wage and Hour are there for them. On the questions that go back pre to 2021, I'll have to get back to you on answers on that one.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I do have another question, but I will enter it into the record for your attention and your response. So, Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Thank you. Next is the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman, for your leadership. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. Mr. Secretary, your budget request sadly favors more regulations, more enforcement, and more litigation, but not much to help workers and business comply. If enacted, your budget request would increase OSHA's office in charge of writing regulations by nearly 50%, and you propose incredibly to hire nearly 200 more employees for the disgraced Office of the Solicitor of Labor. South Carolina has successfully overcome an out-of-control Solicitor of Labor. With the leadership of Governor Nikki Haley, Senators Tim Scott and Lindsey Graham, Attorney General Alan Wilson, we were able to stop the department from what they were attempting to do, which was to close Boeing in Charleston even before they began production. So fortunately, with Nikki Haley's leadership, we now have 9,000 people who work for Boeing and suppliers across South Carolina, but that would have not been possible if we'd had an out-of-control Solicitor of Labor. Your OSHA budget for compliance assistance only increases by 11%, with only a 1% increase, obviously below inflation, for small business compliance assistance. As the American people struggle with inflation, war on service stations, and looming recession, how do you justify policies that penalize businesses without providing them the compliance assistance?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. First and foremost, just the goal of the Department of Labor is not to punish businesses. The goal of the Department of Labor is to work collectively with businesses to enhance businesses for success. And that's why in this budget we're proposing $2.2 billion investment for worker protections worker job enforcement and worker training and workforce development grants. The two areas that you talked about, I'm going to throw in a third one. We're asking for $9.6 million for OSHA, for standards, to make sure that we can make sure that we have worker protection for workers. We're asking for $3.4 million for MSHA, and we're asking for, in our solicitor's office, a modest increase. We're not asking for these large increases that we're looking for. What we want to do is make sure that when we're doing regulations and when we're doing worker protections, that we're able to work across the board. I can honestly say my entire career, I have never gone after businesses. I work collectively with businesses.
Well, that's encouraging, but again, the experience of my home state, we will never get over the Department of Labor, the Solicitor General coming in to close an extraordinary business, being Boeing aircraft, even before they began production, except that they had a 1 million square foot building, they had 1,000 employees, and then your department, prior to you, came in and said, you can't build planes here. And I'm just so proud of Governor Haley, Senator Scott, Senator Graham, Attorney General Alan Wilson, who's on a ballot today in a primary. South Carolina stood firm, but we need to be working together rather than because, hey, aircraft sales, export are so important for the United States. Another issue is right to work. I'm really grateful to have introduced H.R. 1275, the National Right to Work Act, in the House. Over 100 co-sponsors. This leaves up to the states to determine the requirement of union membership. This bill erases automatic dues clauses in the federal statute without adding a single letter to federal law. Given that employment rose by 11% in right-to-work states as a group from 2010 to 20, 5 times as much as the forced unionism states. Why is the Biden administration pushing to eliminate the right-to-work laws? Wouldn't that inevitably pose great harm, destroy jobs in a time when we're trying to have a recovery of our economy?
Thank you, Congressman, for that question. I do not support right-to-work states. I do not support right to work. I support people's right to be able to join a union freely and fairly if they choose. It doesn't mean it's an automatic. There's many states in this country that don't have right-to-work laws that workers have decided not to organize. The Biden administration believes in people's collective right if they want to organize. They don't force them to organize. You don't have to organize. And that's been the policy of President Biden since he's been in Congress.
Secretary, I respectfully disagree. What y'all are proposing is forced unionization. And my home state of South Carolina, because of right to work, we are now the leading producer and exporter of cars of any state in the union. We're the leading manufacturer and exporter of tires of any state in the union due to French, Japanese, German, Singaporean investments. And so right to work works, and I hope that you will look into it. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Wilson, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Fox. And thank you, Secretary Walsh, for being here today. It's always good to see you. We're proud to have you fighting on behalf of American workers. I'm also proud to know you have a Floridian as an assistant, Secretary Jose Javier Rodriguez, on your team supporting reemployment assistance. We're so proud of him here in Miami-Dade County. Secretary Walsh, we learned at a hearing on reauthorization last year that retaining high-quality instructional staff at Job Corps centers is challenging because local school districts can pay more and draw talent away. At the same time, no wage floor is tied to locality pay rates at Job Corps centers because the department has taken administrative action to exempt Job Corps from Service Contract Act. This is puzzling because nothing in the Service Contract Act prohibits coverage for Job Corps center contractors. Will you commit to looking into this exemption and the department's steps to ensure that the contractors running that the contractors who are running Job Corps centers are covered under the Service Contract Act?
Thank you, Congressman. Right now, what we're doing with Job Corps in the Department of Labor is we're looking at realigning and reevaluating and strengthening Job Corps. And part of that is going to be looking at the contracts, making sure that first and foremost, the staff is being treated fairly and paid good wages. And number two, making sure that the effectiveness of the program is effective. We have 57,000 young people that go through Job Corps every year, and there's no reason why those 57,000 young people that go through Job Corps are not connected to a job. Almost everyone in this hearing has a Job Corps in your district or near your district. And I think, quite honestly, in some cases, Job Corps is very successful. In other cases, I think the Job Corps program has let our young people down over the last 20 years in this country. And we're in the process right now of reevaluating, and I wouldn't say reconstructing, it's a little too hard of a word, but reevaluating and making adjustments in Job Corps so that the programs are impactful, both for the participants that go through it, and number two, the staff that work there.
Thank you so much. As Subcommittee Chair of Higher Education and Workforce Innovation and an original co-sponsor of WEOR, I'm looking forward to following up with your team to ensure contract workers are covered. Secretary Walsh, I've had several hardworking newspaper workers from South Miami reach out to me since Trump left office about overtime pay. Before President Trump left office, his wage and hour division classified newspaper workers as creative professionals and not eligible for overtime. That's horrible. And this has resulted in thousands of our newspaper employees doing work they aren't compensated for, including my constituents at my local paper, the Miami Herald. What is the department's position on rescinding this Trump era provision, which is not fair?
On the overtime provision, what we're doing, we've just completed listening sessions. We have not taken any action yet as far as moving forward, but we've done listening sessions all across the country. So I'll have to get back to you on what the next step is.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you looking into it and getting back with me. And I want to thank you for your commitment to equity. But further, as a Black woman, when I heard you speak of the struggles Black women have to obtain high quality jobs in our workforce, I was saddened beyond belief. In Miami, this issue has been further complicated by decades of underinvestment in the agency by Republican leadership, namely Governor DeSantis. Just last year and even today, I received dozens of calls from well-meaning Floridians begging for help with the long waits at the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity to both talk to someone and also receive the unemployment benefits they are rightfully owed. Mr. Secretary, what, if any, help can you and your staff give to everyday Floridians who are waiting for help and their benefits? Is there anything in this budget to address these challenges?
There is money that we're looking for in our Women's Bureau to get a path for getting more people and more women, particularly women of color, engaged, expanding pipelines to careers in infrastructure, including apprenticeships, pre-apprentice programs. Historically, jobs like the trades pay better than other jobs. Women have not gone into those areas. Childcare and elder care are careers where a lot of women are, and they're underpaid. So we're working through the Women's Bureau, and we're also, when we think about, in my opening statement, when I said we're focused on equity and inclusion, those are the areas we're going. So there's lots of different areas in this budget, including the WIOA reauthorization.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. I look forward to working with you in the coming days to address these critical issues, and I yield back.
Thank you. Next, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, for 5 minutes.
Chairman, thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being with us today. It's no surprise to any of my colleagues here that workforce development is a top priority of mine, and my questions center around that. From career and technical education to apprenticeships, I fully support programs that provide learners of all ages with career-ready skills. And one of my proudest moments as a member of Congress was when President Trump signed into law the Strengthening Career and Technical Education for the 21st Century Act that passed with unified support of my colleagues, Republican and Democrats alike, back in 2018, which bolstered our nation's workforce system by increasing alignment with in-demand jobs and improving employer engagement so that more students have the opportunities to move into in-demand and jobs and successful careers. As you know, the Bureau of Labor Statistics released its job report earlier this month. Sadly, the report indicated there are 11.4 million jobs open and available, which remains a record high. Now, this report also found that 4.4 Americans quit their jobs just in April. Now, it's abundantly clear businesses are still struggling to hire qualified candidates with skills necessary to fill these job openings, and this is highly concerning to me. I think one of the things that have made part of American exceptionalism, whether you agree or disagree with that, is the fact that it's the quality of our workforce here in this country. Now, Mr. Secretary, my question is simple. What is the department doing to ensure that individuals have the skills necessary to fill these jobs and get people back to work?
Thank you, Congressman. And first of all, thank you for your opening statement there. It's great to see that we need to continue to work together. And I think the issues of workforce development is an area that every one of us in this Congress in the administration can work together on. When you think about the job openings in the country and you think about the quit rates in the country, people leaving, they're looking for better opportunity. And what I really want to do at the Department of Labor, what we talked about a little while ago in my opening statement, and what we try to do every day, and I'd love to work with you directly on this, is work with companies in looking for the folks that they want to hire and what the job workforce development needs are, what the job skills needs are, and how do we make sure that we're putting these investments, somebody asked me a question earlier today, we're making these investments in taxpayers' dollars, that they're actually making a difference in creating a pathway into good paying jobs all across America. Whether it's Boeing in South Carolina, whether it's Electric Boat in Connecticut, whether it's Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma or any part of the country, we're working to make sure we're expanding apprenticeships, number one. And number two, we're having dialogues through the Good Jobs Initiative. We have an event at the Department of Labor next week. We're going to have 475 different businesses and legislators and mayors and organizations talking about how do we create better pathways. And quite honestly, we cannot miss this opportunity. I think rather than sitting saying, this is the tragedy, what's going on in America, this is an opportunity that we have. So I look forward to working with you on that.
Well, Secretary, I certainly agree that, and I've always focused on adding rungs to the ladder of opportunity and that upward mobility that comes through that. But following up on this, local employers have need flexibility to replace the 3 million workers. Those are looking to climb that rung, that ladder on the ladder of opportunity. But the 3 million workers have gone missing from the workforce since the start of COVID-19. As you know, apprenticeships can help states fill open jobs, but the 85-year-old registered apprenticeship system needs to be updated to provide employers more flexibility. Given this situation, why is Washington not updating the apprenticeship system that's so that industry experts have more say in apprenticeship programs?
Yeah, what we're looking at, two things. Number one is we're looking at expanding apprenticeship programs to bring more industries into it. And I think that that's something that's really important to do. And second, we have an advisory board on apprenticeship that has been very active, that's made up of community colleges, workforce development boards, businesses, labor organizations. And we're working, the apprenticeship committee, advisory committee right now is working at ways of strengthening our apprenticeship programs in the United States of America. So as we continue to do that work, we'll get that information to you. As a matter of fact, I'd love to offline have a conversation with you about some of the ideas you might have.
Mr. Secretary, I look forward to that. I would encourage you in the makeup of that apprenticeship advisory committee, take a page out of the WIOA legislation that this committee passed a number of years ago, where we set a standard of workforce investment boards being at least 60% of employer. Those folks assign the front of a paycheck, not the back of it. And I think that would serve your efforts with apprenticeships very well. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you. And next, gentlelady from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Walsh, for being here today and for your leadership. When you were visiting in Oregon, we talked about the importance of pre-apprenticeships and the great work of Oregon tradeswomen. Few people can afford to dedicate weeks or months to a pre-apprenticeship program without income to support themselves and their families. So unpaid programs will therefore disproportionately exclude people with fewer financial resources and likely result in a pool of apprentices that lacks racial, ethnic, and gender diversity. So Secretary Walsh, how would investments in registered apprenticeships as outlined in the department's budget request increase the affordability of pre-apprenticeships and expand diversity in the trades?
Well, thank you very much, Congresswoman. First and foremost, in my career, I've created 2 pre-apprentice programs. In those pre-apprentice programs, the importance of the pre-apprentice program is getting somebody the knowledge of what field they might go into. And when I created those programs, there's 2 things we did. Number one is we were able to, and they're both in construction at the time, so just so we know what we're talking about, we're able to create a stipend where these workers would come in, join a pre-apprentice program, get paid while they're in a pre-apprentice program. And we also provided them with the boots and the tools and the belts and the things that people needed, because quite honestly, we're taking people off the street that we're trying to open up a whole new world for, and they don't have the money to buy a hammer. They don't have the money to buy a pair of work boots, and they certainly don't have the money to take time off of their job usually making minimum wage to go to a pre-apprentice program. So that's when we think about pre-apprentice programs, we have to think about how do we help people funding and creating pathways. The second thing is with pre-apprentice programs, we need to make sure that people get the knowledge in a pre-apprentice program that they know what they're going to be challenged with when they get into an apprentice program and get into a career. Now, the model that we all think about when we think about apprenticeships is building trades, because that's they spend their own money. Right. It's a $2 billion investment a year. They do their own money in that. And in some cases, non-union companies have apprenticeships too in the construction trades. So they have their apprenticeships. We have to take that model from the construction industry and put that into other industries and get those pre-apprenticeships in there so people get an understanding. When I talked about Volkswagen last week, when I was in Volkswagen, these are 16, 17, 18-year-old kids that were learning a skill, but they also got a stipend. So they were getting paid while they were learning on-the-job training, and then they were going to school and they're doing other things. So that's the magic success to a pre-apprentice program.
It does make a difference, and I've had conversations with people in pre-apprenticeship programs. It's life-changing. So, Mr. Secretary, we hear a lot about staffing shortages these days and workforce challenges. What difference would it make if workers had access to affordable child care?
I mean, childcare, if anybody in this committee goes out to the local coffee shop or the grocery store this weekend when you're out there shopping, ask a young person about childcare. Ask about the cost. Oftentimes what we've seen during this pandemic, we've seen particularly women leave the workforce, quite honestly, because they weren't making it work. Where they were paying 50, 60, 70% of their salary to go to work to provide childcare when they could just stay at home and do it. But what you're seeing is a lack of workers in the field. And, you know, in the Build Back Better provision, there was one aspect of that, well, a couple aspects, but the one aspect I think is really important for the future of our economy is dealing with the childcare system that we have in America. Much of the childcare system is either left for the states, the locals, or communities to try and figure out on their own. And they can't keep the workers there because they're underpaid and they're overworked. And the pandemic really had big impacts on childcare facilities because from March of 2020 through the end of 2020, childcare providers were shut down because people were working from home. And what happened was they lost their staff, they lost their overhead, they lost their funding, they lost their money, and there was nothing to support them. So I honestly feel that as the Labor Secretary, if we're thinking about what the crises are in the future, one of our crises is childcare for our workers. Another crisis, which was not maybe come up later on, is immigration. And we have to figure out those two issues. Those are two big issues looming for our economy.
Mr. Secretary, we're not giving up on the child care issue. If we want to unleash the power of women, we absolutely must make sure that our child care workers make a living wage and that child care is affordable for families. Mr. Chairman, I want to say that as a member of the committee on the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis and the Committee on Science, Space and Technology and Education and Labor, I'm interested in addressing policy issues at the intersection of workforce and energy. I've spoken with members of the energy efficiency industry, which employs more Americans than any other energy profession, about the challenges they face with accessing federal workforce training dollars. And I'm going to be submitting questions for the record, Mr. Secretary and Mr. Chairman, to explore this issue in depth, because as we transition to clean energy, we need to build a clean energy workforce as well. So I will look forward to the department's prompt response on that and look forward to working with you in the committee on addressing that issue.
And I'd like to say to you, Chairwoman, thank you so much for your willingness and offer to speak at the Good Jobs Initiative next week. We're very excited. You have a lot to offer there, and thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Wahlberg.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I probably should hesitate, but I'm not going to. Hearing the opening statements of both the Secretary and the Chairman, talking about the great things that were going on and historic successes that are taking place in our economy. I just wanted to make sure that the citizens who might be listening to this hearing don't assume that those statements were taken from the Babylon Bee. I say that in good humor, but I say it in reality, especially when I just read a recent survey that says at least 83% of Americans describe their view of the U.S. economy negatively, and by other measures, Americans are experiencing levels of economic dissatisfaction not seen in years. For only the second time in a half century, more than 3 in 10 respondents said their financial situation was worse off. And I mean, that's the reality of what we're living in right now and the challenges we have. So let me ask you, Secretary Walsh, or make a statement here. First, on April 20th, the department noticed the proposed rule that would require states to use their state merit staff to provide services under the Wagner-Pfizer Act of Employment Services. This one-size-fits-all rule would require all states to use state merit staff regardless of whether states had a longstanding waiver to operate under alternate staffing models such as Colorado, Massachusetts, and my home state of Michigan. The Michigan system of providing employment services has a track record of success, consistently outpacing the national median for performance, and has one of the lowest costs per participant in the country. However, because of this rule, 20 job centers will be forced to close in Michigan, 2 in Detroit alone, and more than 220 jobs will be placed in jeopardy. Secretary Walsh, as you know, the Trump administration issued a rule granting states maximum flexibility in their staffing models to provide employment services. The rule that your agency is now proposing seeks to undo that flexibility, to align employment service with unemployment insurance staffing models. The text argues that this will allow staff to respond to demand for unemployment insurance, which is more important, quote, "I'll personally take employment over unemployment insurance any day." Secretary Walsh, the labor shortage continues to be a challenge for small businesses, with 51% of owners reporting job openings, which matches a 48-year record high. So with all due respect, I believe this rule suggests the administration lacks touch with reality and is focused on keeping people out of work rather than getting people back into good-paying jobs. I hope this isn't the case. And so, Mr. Secretary, with the current workforce crisis facing our country, why is the department proposing to end this flexibility when the change will drive up program costs and harm employers and job seekers by limiting available resources?
Thank you, Congressman. I just, in regards to the rulemaking, because of the deliberative rulemaking process and it's still pending, I'm unable to really provide you with a timetable concerning the final rule or concerning what's in the rule. And as you know, the rules, I can't talk about that.
But you have suggested the ending of that flexibility that was in the last administration's handling of employment issues.
Again, it's in the rulemaking process. I can't get into. I don't know what's in the final rule because the rule's going through the process.
Well, we will submit questions for the record then.
Yes, please.
Hoping at the very least we can get your staff to give us some idea relative to what's going on in this process. Let me move on. I've been disappointed to hear multiple statements from the Department of Labor officials that the department is determined to resurrect some or all of the 2016 fiduciary rule. This was an unmitigated disaster and was invalidated by the Fifth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals. As you know, the Administrative Procedure Act governs the process by which federal agencies develop and issue regulations. Earlier this year, a lawsuit was filed against the department's Employee Benefits Security Administration alleging that EBSA issued sub-regulatory guidance that amounted to rulemaking and failed to comply with APA requirements. Have you reviewed this suit and EBSA's work on the fiduciary rule, and what's your office doing to ensure that the Department of Labor and EBSA fully comply with APA's requirements?
Thank you very much. When retirement savers receive advice on how to best meet the particular financial needs, they should be able to trust in the advice that they're receiving and understand that's the best interest. We want to make sure that American workers and their families are protected as they save for their retirement. Last year, the Department of Labor allowed a new exemption to go into effect, including protections for advice on rollovers, such as from employees' benefits to IRAs. These types of rollovers often represent a lifetime of savings and deserve better protections. So what we want to do is make sure that the person, the employee or the private citizen is protected. We also want to make sure that the playing field is level and the level playing field for companies that exist right now.
Well, the court is not in agreement with you on this, and I just am concerned that we're going back after a dead horse, as it were, that will not do what you're suggesting, that I would want to see as well. But we found a better way to do it, and to go backwards is wrong. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. The gentleman from California, Mr. Cano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Walsh, thank you for coming before the committee today. I'm not sure you're aware or not, but last year my office, alongside with some members of this committee, submitted a letter to the department asking for the adoption of a salary threshold in line with the historical high point of salary thresholds, the 55th percentile of earnings of full-time salaried workers nationwide, which would be at least $82,732 by 2026. I want you to know that I'm planning to send another letter reiterating that same request and asking for an update on the rulemaking process, because I'm frankly concerned that we're going to be running out of time to get this rule promulgated. Now, do you believe that the current overtime pay threshold of $35,568 for white-collar employees is too high, too low, or just about right?
Thank you, Congressman. I actually don't have an opinion on that at the moment. We have just gone through listening sessions, so I do not have an opinion, public opinion on that at this moment.
I understand. Well, maybe I can ask you this. Are you aware that in the 1970s, roughly 65% of all salaried workers qualified for overtime pay?
I was not.
That is true. And what I also believe is true is, you happen to know what the overtime pay, what percent of workers were covered by the overtime threshold, who was eligible, what percent were eligible under by the time the Obama was president?
I don't have that number either.
Between 7 and 10%. The threshold had never been updated, or had been so infrequently updated that the numbers of Americans who worked full-time salaried jobs who were covered by overtime pay under the FLSA had atrophied, had declined from 65% to around 10%. Well, you know that President Obama and his Secretary of Labor promulgated a rule toward the end of the second term of the Obama administration, the second administration, and that rule was invalidated by a conservative federal court judge. However, the Labor Secretary under Obama, Trump appealed that case. And it is your belief that you have the authority as Secretary of your department to establish the threshold?
I believe we do through the rulemaking process. And at the end of the Obama administration, and I believe in the beginning days of the Trump administration, they did address the issue of overtime. They moved it to in a positive way, not quite to the 55 percentile, but I know that they did move it. So I believe, from what I've been told by my solicitor and through the process, we do have the ability to look at not just overtime, but also duty stations if we choose.
Well, were you aware that the Trump DOL rule gutted overtime pay and protections for roughly 4.2 million workers that were previously eligible to receive overtime pay compensation under the Obama administration rule?
Yeah, I knew the Trump rule was very different than the Obama rule.
So there was a differential. Yeah. So even though that President Trump argued that he was a populist trying to do right by America's working people, the rule that they promulgated meant that 4.2 million workers that would have been covered, would have been made eligible, were not eligible under the Trump rule. You were aware of that, right? Okay. Can you speak further about when DOL plans to issue a notice of proposed rulemaking?
I don't have an exact timeline. We just finished the public, taking input from the public comment, and we're going to be looking and seeing what the information we've received from people.
Well, many legislators, such as myself, are under the impression that time is working against us and that an important window of opportunity may soon close. In the past, I've introduced legislation to index the overtime threshold. Do you believe that this is necessary?
I believe we have to look at it, take a serious look at it as we move forward.
Okay. Policies such as the federal minimum wage, overtime threshold, and the standard work week all exist to mandate standards for the well-being of workers. I recently introduced the 32-hour work week bill to reduce the standard work week from 40 hours to 32 hours by lowering the maximum hours threshold for overtime compensation for non-exempt employees under the FLSA. We're starting to see countries around the world begin to experiment with truncated work weeks. Have you paid attention to these preliminary pilot programs?
I've certainly, after you mentioned it to me when we visited your district, I've been paying attention to it.
All right. Well, I'm running out of time, but maybe we can have further public discussion of this.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Take it back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from New York, Ms. Stefanik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Walsh, during last year's hearing, I asked you why the Biden administration abruptly ended the Payroll Audit Independent Determination, or the PAID program, which was a successful compliance assistance program created under the Trump administration. And at the time, you said you were not familiar with this program at all. That's a quote. And that was very concerning to me, that as the Secretary of Labor, you were not aware of the decision of your own department to unwind this program. So after you've taken the time to learn about it, which I'm sure you have, I hope you've found, which are the facts, that the PAID program incentivized employers to proactively identify and fix any inadvertent payroll mistakes, getting workers 100% of the wages they earned faster than a traditional investigation would. This also allowed DOL to reach employers that typically were not prioritized for enforcement. This was a resounding success under the Trump administration. Millions of back pay, millions of back wages were paid, and this benefited tens of thousands of workers. So given this success, why did the administration end this program that helped employers comply with the law, a program that is a pro-worker program?
Thank you very much. I think last year when I was asked the question, I think I was about 6 weeks on the job. So it was, there was a lot that happened in the administration before I even got to be Secretary of Labor. But that's yesterday's news. Workers are certainly entitled to every single penny that they have earned. The last administration's Payroll Audit Independent Termination Program, after looking at it, we understood that it deprived workers of their rights to put employers that play by the rules at a disadvantage. And in January of 2021, obviously we ended the program, wage and hour. The division provides significant outreach and educational resources for employers seeking assistance to understand their responsibility to comply with the wage and hour laws. So we continue to work with businesses. And the U.S. Department of Labor is rigorously enforcing the law, and we will see that all the enforcement tools we have available. So we're going to continue to work with businesses on this.
Sure. I know that your argument is that it deprives workers of their rights, and that is simply not accurate. After an employer identifies back wages owed to employees through the PAID program, each individual employee has the choice to accept the back wages from the employer or to decline the settlement, and this preserves their private right of action. So the decision remains and is squarely in the hands of the worker. Moving on to worker classification, which is an important issue. Nearly 19 million Americans choose the freedom and flexibility of engaging in the modern economy as independent contractors. This is something that, as a new mom, many of my fellow new moms pursue this flexibility. They choose being their own boss over working as an employee for someone else. They choose when and how to provide their services, earning on their own terms instead of being told when to clock in and when to clock out. So my question is, why, Secretary Walsh, is the department targeting independent contractors and trying to take away that freedom and flexibility that are currently enjoyed by redefining employee status under the Fair Labor Standards Act? My frustration is that the administration doesn't believe Americans, they don't trust Americans to choose for themselves how to earn a living, and that bureaucrats in Washington should dictate how they work. I simply disagree with that, but I'm curious why the department is making that determination.
Because 19 million people don't choose to be independent contractors all across the board. Some of those folks are being forced into those different jobs, thinking that they were hired as employees, and then they get paid with a 1099. And what we want to do is make sure workers that do choose to work as independent contractors have the protections they have, and workers that want to be employees should be treated as employees.
Sure. So to address the misclassification of workers, I would urge you to work with Congress to update the FLSA and insert the common law standard for worker classification that's used by most other federal agencies, bringing a clear and consistent set of rules across the federal government. I've legislatively been very active on that. I think it's very important that you know that Congress is working on this. Also, if you truly wanted to address this misclassification, we should leave the Trump administration rule in effect, as it provided clear rules of the road for workers and employees employees on what constitutes an employer-employee relationship and when a worker is an independent contractor. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Adams.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Walsh, I'd like to start with lessons you learned as a result of the pandemic. What has the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and other recent events on workers taught the department about the need to have a national comprehensive paid family and medical leave program?
I think that the pandemic actually exacerbated that. I think we needed a comprehensive paid family leave program prior to the pandemic. And I think what we've learned during the pandemic, we're still living in the pandemic times, but we're seeing lots of families that need to take care of their families, take care of sick relatives. So paid family leave, if you look at the world, the global economic world, we are at the bottom of the list when you talk about paid family leave, and it seems to be very successful in Europe and other countries that offer paid family leave for their employees. I've spoken to companies in America that have offered paid family leave, and quite honestly, the benefits for the companies has been retention, retaining people, and a workforce that is very productive.
Okay, well, thank you for that. So let me turn our attention to the issue of workforce preparedness and apprenticeships. This is something that we also previously talked about. One of the department's budget priorities is the registered apprenticeship system. You and I both agree on the importance of apprenticeship programs in fortifying our workforce pipeline. So can you talk about partnerships that the Department of Labor has with HBCUs or other minority serving institutions in recruiting participants for or hosting registered apprenticeship programs?
Well, first and foremost, partnerships are key to registered apprenticeship programs and pre-apprenticeship programs. You have those partnerships to create a pathway into different industry. It's going to be key. As a matter of fact, later on today, I have a meeting in my office with Marty Muriel from the Urban League to talk exactly about workforce development job trainings. The budget request that we're asking for here is $303 million for registered apprenticeships. And quite honestly, it's to expand, modernize, and diversify registered apprenticeships by investing in high-quality youth and pre-apprentice programs, historical black colleges, community colleges, organizations, community workforce development boards. All of those folks need to be at the table in different parts of this country if we want to be successful in creating a pathway in. So the Department of Labor, through Congress, allocates this money, this revenue to do these programs. We don't carry these programs out. It's the local authorities and local cities and towns and the organizations that are the ones that are going to be helping us carry these programs out. So it is vitally important, because if we don't have it, it's not successful.
Okay, so can you share a couple of examples of successful outreach efforts with these institutions? Can you name one or two?
Yeah, Youth Build being one. We just provided workforce development program money through Youth Build. I want to say it's $24 million to expand Youth Build and to get Youth Build into the space of clean energy and solar panels. That's one. And then I talked a little earlier about it. Two programs that I created, Building Pathways and Operation Exit, that work on. We work with the police, the criminal justice system, the NAACP. We work with different organizations all across Boston, and so that's another program. And I've seen it work in cities all across America. Oregon is doing a program, and that's been very successful through Oregon's tradeswomen, getting folks in. They're doing it in California, they're doing it in Chicago, they're doing it in New York, and we need to expand those programs.
Okay, so thanks for sharing that, and of course, we look forward to seeing what the department will do in 2023 with respect to apprenticeships. And so lastly, I'd also like to know, with respect to enforcement of the DOL issue health and safety standards, does the Office of the Solicitor have what it needs to process standards in a timely manner?
It doesn't. Our Solicitor Office is quite honestly, in the last 4 years, many of the departments at the Department of Labor and many of the different agencies have been decimated by not backfilling and not in budget cuts and not replacing workers in our own department. And the Solicitor Office is no different to that. We're asking for an increase. I would argue a modest increase in the Solicitor's Office to make sure that we can make sure that we're doing the rules and regulations to make sure we're protecting workers in America.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman.
In your testimony, you spent a great deal of time talking about equity, and obviously that's a priority of yours. You've put a lot more money, or you're requesting a lot more money in the pursuit of equity than the baseline figures would suggest. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. One of the things that I kind of wonder about as a practical matter, how it works out, and I've talked to employers about this, you enforce affirmative action requirements against federal contractors. And that results in employers hiring people maybe differently than they would otherwise. I have a general question. Does this result in non-citizens being able to check the box and get preferences, and does it result in illegal people, or people who are not legally being able to get preference in federal contractors? How are those handled by an employer?
I don't believe that somebody who is an undocumented citizen has the ability to access those jobs. Unless it's an H-2 program where we raise the cap on H-2A, H-2B visa programs, that's a different story.
Do you enforce it?
Pardon me?
Do you enforce it? I mean, we all know right now, I've actually talked to an employer, that many people who are here not legally are being employed. And I wondered whether, and some people who are legally, right? I mean, there are certain people who are legally who are getting employed. And I wondered, for the purposes of filling out the forms that are required for federal contractors, if people who are not citizens but members of favored groups are getting jobs ahead of citizens.
In federal contracting, you're talking about?
Correct.
Yeah, no, I mean, we do not enforce the law at the Department of Labor on that. That's Homeland Security that enforces the law.
No, I'm not talking about Homeland Security. I'm talking about...
But I'm telling you, the answer is Homeland Security. We don't do the enforcement there. DHS does. So if somebody were to fill out a form and check the box, and they didn't have a Social Security number.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking when somebody comes in either illegally and have a phony Social Security number, or are here legally but are a non-citizen.
Yeah, they don't work on those jobs, and that's enforced by DHS. If DHS was to find that out, the employer is responsible to make sure that their employees...
You don't understand the question.
I don't.
Okay, there are people here, many people who are non-citizens who work legally, okay? There are other people who are here not legally but get phony Social Security numbers and work for big companies that do business with the government. And the question is, when these companies fill out the forms and somebody is a member of a favored group...
What does that mean, favored group? Can you just describe that to me?
Well, for equity purposes, right? You've talked a lot about equity, and one of the ways you get to what you would consider equity is through the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, which are your programs. And every employee, the employer must fill out a form putting that employee somewhere on the form. Now, if I am either here illegally and have a wrong Social Security number, which is very common, I hope you know that, or if you are here legally, somewhere you're going to have to appear on that form for the purposes of reaching what you would describe as equity. I'm asking you what becomes of those people on the form.
Let me just clarify something. I don't think I would describe a person of color in our country as favorable. When we do equity programs, it's to make sure that we have equity in our hiring, to make sure that a woman of color, a man of color, somebody who's here, who's a citizen in this country, has access to jobs that, quite honestly, historically have been shut out for.
Right, and I just asked you what happens to non-citizens who are working for
DHS. It's DHS, Homeland Security.
No. I'm talking about people who are here legally, or people who, which is very common.
You're not listening to me.
Social Security numbers.
If somebody fills out a document with a fake Social Security number, that's what you said to me, and on a contract and gets employment in the United States of America, that is the responsibility of Department of Homeland Security to follow up on that. We have some compliance officers. We would work with Homeland Security, but I don't think that's a big issue.
Well, And I'll ask you just to clarify, because I don't think you're getting what I'm getting at here. If you are here legally, and there are people here legally working for 40 years.
Yeah, my mother was an immigrant in this country that had a green card. So she was here, she was a documented immigrant before she became a United States citizen.
Correct. And the question is, in somebody like that, where do they wind up with on the government form? Are we, as a practical matter, giving them preference, or people here illegally getting?
I actually will get back to you on, let me find out from my Office of Federal Contractor Compliance and get back to you on that quick answer.
Okay. The next question I have.
The gentleman's,
Okay, thank you.
okay. Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from California, Mr. DeSaulnier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, it's delightful to see you. I'm not going to ask questions or make comments about basketball games. You'll be happy to know. But I'd be happy to watch the next game with you. Great series.
Game 6 is at the Boston Garden, by the way.
Yeah, you're welcome to come out in the Bay Area if there's a Game 7. I have a couple of questions about different subject matters, and I know that graduates of Boston College can handle different subject matters, Mr. Chairman. First, your comments and your introductory comments about the International Labor Affairs Bureau. We have a bill that would authorize, for the first time, American full engagement in that. In a global economy, as you said in your comments, we need to be engaged in that to protect all workers. So any comments you have about that? And a subject, you came out to my district, an area that has 5 refineries in it, good paying jobs, best performing refineries in terms of industrial safety and environmental consequences, also the headquarters of Chevron in our area. Those jobs we want to transition. You saw our apprenticeship programs. You went to one of our pre-apprenticeship programs. We actually think there are more jobs, good paying jobs in the transition. Big impact. My colleague from Oregon has talked about this. So how can we work with you, the Department of Commerce, EPA, to make sure that we identify this transition? Because there are generations of jobs between NOAA. NOAA has a whole list of jobs for sea level rise, for wildfires, for hurricanes. This is just good policy, but we have to coordinate our assets and make sure that the workforce knows that they're good paying jobs, and there are jobs that don't need career changes, just continuing investments in education. So those two things, and then I wanted to follow up on a couple around mental health that we've talked about.
All right, thank you, sir. And real quickly, on the transition into good paying jobs, thank you, into the climate jobs. I want to thank you for having me in your district very early on in my tenure as Secretary of Labor. I learned a great deal. We sat with the steelworkers that day. People were upset about the jobs being transitioned. And when we think about workforce development, job training grants, we're thinking about how do we create these pathways so we're able to, maybe not tomorrow, but over time, transition people into new industries so they don't lose their place in society. One of the grants that we did, I spoke a little earlier about, is youth builds. We're also thinking about young people. And in the youth build grant, I want to say it was $24 million, if I'm mistaken. My office will correct it later on. That went to youth build. Historically, youth build has been a program of training folks in carpentry and woodworking and things like that. And we have a component of that with clean energy and creating a pathway. So we have to really think about our grant-making process and getting more ability to be able to do that. When it comes to Ilab, we're in lots of different spaces. I've asked for an increase in this budget, both to keep an eye on the trade agreements that we have around the globe, making sure we have worker protections around the globe. And I've spent a lot, in the last couple of months, the last year or so, I've been to Cabo Verde, I've been to Germany, I've been to South Korea, and also Deputy Secretary Sue has been to Mexico, working with the international community on labor standards, labor's rights, and also creating pathways.
There's terrific opportunities, and this is all while we keep to our goals of reducing carbon reductions. As somebody who was very involved, at that time was now Senator Padilla, on the California Renewable Portfolio Standards, we can make those goals, I think, and pass them, and at the same time provide a new economy with good paying jobs. On two separate subjects, first of all, telehealth, and telework, I should say, but related. Chairman DeFazio is a member of the T&I committee. We've talked a lot about this, that the opportunity coming out in places like Boston and San Francisco and others to help people be able to improve their quality of life so they don't spend hours getting to and from work but protect their labor rights, and at the same time ensure that the employer is getting good productivity. Could you talk about where the Labor Department might be helpful in that regard?
Yeah, I also think telehealth, we learned a lot in the last couple of years with the pandemic. We talked about childcare, we talked about workforce development, we talked about people leaving their job. Telehealth is one of those areas it was in some cases a bright spot where people have been able to use the telehealth, whether it's a COVID diagnosis and not having to bring people into hospitals that had emergency numbers in the hospital. Also, I've spoken to employers around the country that are using telehealth in response to the mental health crisis and doing mental health counseling. And so we're certainly working, our EPSA department is working, looking at telehealth and want to make sure we're expanding benefits in those spaces. And with the mental health parity law, I know it's jumping back a little bit, with the mental health parity law, we need to increase our counseling services in the United States of America and our coverage service in America for American workers that want to get health care.
And Mr. Chairman, we just happened to have a conversation this morning, Mr. Allen and I, about things that we could work on together to help with telehealth, but also telework. So look forward to the continued conversation. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Good luck.
Thank you. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Allen, that's 5 minutes.
Hello, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for being here. Just a quick note. The previous administration, we had an all-time high of about 160 million Americans working. Now we got around 132.8, and this excludes part-time workers, 132.8 million, so it's down substantially. We know we got about 11 million job vacancies, plus or minus, out there today. So you got a lot of work to do, and I want to help you. And one of the things that we really noticed the last time, which is why I introduced the Employee Rights Act, which protects independent contractors from overreaching classifications. Nearly 19 million Americans, which my colleague, Ms. Stefanik, pointed out, these are entrepreneurs. They're building tremendous wealth, and they were responsible for 70% of the job growth under the previous administration. I think it would be well served that you get into the research on who is really creating jobs in this country and who is really building wealth in this country. And in fact, this is really a part of the momentum of the modern workforce. And we seem to be stuck in the past. We got to move into the future, and we got to get folks back to work. So I want to help you with that. Additionally, I'd like to discuss the DOL's proposed environmental social governance, or ESG, investing in proxy voting rule. Currently, ERISA requires retirement plan fiduciaries to act solely on the interest of plan participants for the exclusive purpose of providing benefits to those participants. This has been upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court. That being said, the DOL's proposed ESG rule is clearly at odds with the law and the Supreme Court decision. I introduced the Ensuring Sound Guidance Act, which would ensure investment advisors prioritize maximizing returns and empower plan participants to choose how they invest their capital. So why have you issued this proposed rule in defiance and breaking the law and the Supreme Court decision and their clear decision?
Thank you, sir. Let me just, real quickly on your first point. Last year, first of all, I want to take you up on your offer as far as working with you on creating more opportunities for employment in the country. Just so we saw last year, if I might have the numbers correctly, we saw an increase of 20% increase in entrepreneurships in this country, 4.7 million people who went out on their own last year alone. And one of the positive signs is that a lot of the folks that did that were women and people of color. So we saw a big increase in entrepreneurships in America last year. So again, I'd love to work with you on that more. Last year,
you're in favor of independent contractors continuing this process as far as creating jobs?
Oh yeah, I'm in favor of entrepreneurship. I mean, a lot of times, you can define it as independent contractors. You can define it as somebody who starts on their own, going out, and then eventually they become companies and making investments in those folks. A lot of companies, no company started. Amazon didn't start as Amazon. Wayfair didn't start as Wayfair. You had somebody who sat in a room. I know Wayfair, for example, 2 college roommates from Boston sat in a room, and they created this company, and now it's Wayfair.
Now, I'm talking about skilled workers. Skilled workers being independent contractors. And again, the DOL is pushing to try to combine independent contractors under union agreements, preventing them from being entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And Mr. Fonick covered that pretty well with you. But anyway, getting back to this ESG thing, can you tell me why you're breaking the law there?
I don't know if I'm breaking the law, but we'll see. I think the court did rule. We'll see.
Yeah.
Certainly, last year we released a proposal to empower financial plan fiduciaries to safeguard American workers. So we're working through this process. I will gladly get you. I don't have enough information in front of me at the moment because you're going to run out of time. But I'd love to talk to you about.
Well, I got a couple of other questions. I'm going to submit. I'm out of time with the H2A and the wage requirements there that are going to put our farmers out of business. And so I'll submit those in writing, and I would appreciate your responding to them. Thank you, Mr.
I support the
Secretary.
H2A program and the H2B program.
Right, good. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. Macbeth.
Thank you so much, Chairman Scott, for hosting this important hearing today, and thank you, Secretary Walsh, for taking the time to be with us. I would also like to thank you and also your staff and the administration for proposing a budget at the Department of Labor that truly puts working families first. Thank you for that, not large corporations and overpaid CEOs. Each of us here today has an obligation to every family in this country, an obligation to give every parent the opportunity to make the lives of their children better and their own, an opportunity to better themselves and live a healthy and a fulfilling life through a good job, hard work, and plain old good determination. The American dream is a promise to the American people. It is one that I do not take lightly, and it is one that I intend to keep. In the words of President Biden, he said, "Show me your budget, and I'll tell you your value, what you value." And through the Department of Labor's proposed budget, it's obvious to those of us who are here engaging in good faith with you today and the current administration that you also take this promise to heart and that you truly do value American workers and their voices in the workplace. A cornerstone of this budget proposal is creating an economy that works for everyone. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen how crucial it is for workers to have access to not just job-protected family and medical leave, but also job-protected paid leave. While the Family Medical Leave Act, FMLA, was an important step in the right direction, the average American knows that they cannot afford to take more than just a few days of unpaid leave or time off to welcome a newborn or care for sick or disabled loved one. Under current law, workers who are in urgent, dire need of job-protected leave are the workers who are the least likely to be able to afford it. The guarantee of leave means nothing to the American people if they can't afford to take the unpaid time off to actually use it. My first question for you is, Secretary Walsh, can you briefly discuss the barriers that workers are facing in this nation when they are attempting to utilize their leave under the FMLA program?
I will have to get back to you on specific cases, but again, I think one of the biggest barriers that employees are facing is that FMLA is not necessarily uniform across the board, and paid family leave is not uniform across the board. And I know there are several pieces of legislation that deals with those two issues, and particularly paid family leave, medical leave. And as I mentioned a little earlier today, I think well, maybe there's more than two, but two big crises facing our economy is number one, childcare, and the second would be paid family leave, which is in the same line with that. We saw it during the pandemic in the beginning days. We see it now today. So there's certainly opportunities for us to do more there for American workers and, quite honestly, American companies.
Well, thank you for that. And then also, Secretary Walsh, in the President's State of the Union address, he called for creating a new federal paid family and medical leave program. If such a program were to be created, it would bring the United States in line with most of the other developed nations around the world. Can you tell us why job-protected paid family leave is such a crucial policy for the betterment of American workers and their families in the United States?
Yeah, I'm gonna just answer it for the other side for a minute from the business standpoint. I've spent enough time now as Secretary of Labor talking to companies that provide paid family leave, and the benefit for their company is retention and retaining workers and attracting workers to the company, and a better work environment that their workers, companies have said to me, feel more productive. That's on the company side. On the worker side, it allows the families to have less stress and opportunity, and allows families actually, more people to go back into the workforce. We saw the beginning days of the pandemic where women dropped out of the workforce at historic numbers, and there was a fear at one point in my tenure as Secretary of Labor that we weren't going to get women back into the workforce. They're critical for our economy. We're starting to see more women go back into the workforce, but it's not because that they want to, because they still have challenges at home. It's because they have to support their family. If we had a good paid family leave program in place, we would have opportunities for our employees and employers. This program benefits both sides. It doesn't benefit one, and it benefits both sides. It benefits the employee in the company, and it benefits the employer.
Thank you so much. Now yield back my time.
Thank you. Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, can you briefly explain your roles and responsibilities as Secretary of Labor related to the Thrift Savings Plan, the federal pension program?
I mean, I'm the chair of the PBGC board, along with the Secretary of the Treasury and the Secretary of Commerce, and we have quarterly meetings, and we have an administration over there that runs the program.
Pretty significant role. Secretary of Labor plays a pretty significant role in oversight of the Thrift Savings Plan.
I would say so, yes.
Yeah, I agree. Mr. Secretary, I sent you a letter dated March 18th, 2022 with a number of my colleagues. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit this letter for the record. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit this letter for the record. Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit this letter for the record.
Without objection. I'm sorry.
Mr. Secretary, we haven't heard back from you yet, a response to this letter dated May 18th. The letter is about the Thrift Savings Plan's investments in Chinese companies that pose a threat to U.S. national security and that use Uyghur slave labor. So in the letter, I note a number of companies that the Thrift Savings Plan invests in that uses Uyghur slave labor. Do you care about human rights abuses of the Uyghur slaves in China?
Yeah, I do, and I don't. My team doesn't remember getting the letter, so I'd like to get a copy of the letter.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
Well, I'm glad you care about it. Are you aware that there are companies that the Thrift Savings Plan invests in that uses Uyghur slave
Not to
labor?
my knowledge.
Okay. How can, Mr. Secretary, how can the United States challenge China while simultaneously allowing investments in the very same companies whose activities threaten the U.S. national security and use forced slave labor in China? How can we accomplish that?
I have no idea.
So you would agree that that's problematic?
Again, I'm going to do some homework on this. We haven't received the letter. If I had the letter on March 21st, and had the information, I'd be unprepared for this question.
Do you believe, Mr. Secretary, that it's in America's best interest to not finance our adversaries?
I certainly believe it's in America's best interest to create more manufacturing opportunities here in the United States of America, supporting the Bipartisan Innovation Act, doing more of the opportunity for investment here in our country is what we should be doing.
But you would agree it's wild that we would allow our federal pension dollars to invest in the military of our biggest adversary.
Again, I'm not familiar with what you're talking about.
But you would agree that would be wild.
I'm not going to speculate on a question.
It's not speculation. It's happening.
Well, I want to make sure it's accurate.
Okay. Clearly, you haven't been paying attention the last few years. In 2020, when the Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Board plans to permit investment in Chinese companies. When that first surfaced, the Trump administration directed the FRTIB to halt such investments, citing national security and human rights concerns. So clearly, if you're not aware of this, you weren't paying attention to this in 2020. But Mr. Secretary,
I was the mayor of Boston in 2020.
Yeah.
Wasn't paying attention to a lot the administration was doing at the time.
Hopefully you can catch up on this quickly, Mr. Secretary. This is important. Human rights abuses against Uyghur slaves in China is not a laughing matter.
Yeah, I'm not laughing. I'm well aware of it.
It appears that you're dismissing it, and I want you to pay attention to it. That's why I'm raising it. So can you commit to halting all investment in Chinese companies that abuse human rights in the Thrift Savings Plan?
Again, I have to do some more research on it.
Do you believe that it is in America's best interest to not have our futures invested in and our retirement security dependent on the success of investments in non-market economies and non-democratic countries?
Again, I'm going to do some research on it.
That's not a question that's worth researching. It's a yes or no question.
I just gave you an answer.
Is it worth investing in our adversaries' military through our federal pension program?
Again, I'll do some
Is that worth
research
it?
on it. I'll get back to you on it.
Mr. Secretary, do you care that there are dollars of federal retirees going toward companies that use Uyghur slave labor in China?
If that's the case, absolutely.
I care about that.
If that's the case, absolutely.
Mr. Secretary, how does your department intend to separate good Chinese companies from bad Chinese companies? What are you doing about that? Like, what would you do about that?
What do you mean by that?
What was what I'm asking you?
Are you talking about American companies in China?
Companies
Are
that
you
violate human rights and companies that don't.
Some of the companies that violate human rights are also working for American companies, so we have a bigger issue there.
Okay. Mr. Secretary, I get the impression that you do not care. You do not care that the federal pension program invests in companies that use Uyghur slaves and that you're not intent upon doing anything about it. You've been in this job for long enough that you should know something about it, and you don't. And
Well,
with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
And I'd like to, if you wouldn't mind sending that letter to my office, because according to my office, we didn't receive the letter. So I'd like to get the letter before I get questioned on something that might not have happened.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Wild.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here today. And I will tell you that based upon your visit to Pennsylvania 7 some time ago, the workers of Pennsylvania 7 believe that you care very, very much about them, and I appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
I hope you'll come back. I want to talk about the portion of your budget that proposes $3 billion for WIOA employment and training state grant programs. And specifically, I want to talk about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which, of course, is a historic bipartisan investment in our nation's infrastructure. But I also have concerns about whether we have the skilled labor that we need to build and rebuild our nation's infrastructure. I suspect that that is a concern shared by you.
Yeah, it's a big priority, and certainly when I look at the jobs numbers every month, we look at the industries and what's happening in those industries, and we're seeing growth in construction, we're seeing growth in manufacturing, we're seeing historic growth in manufacturing in our country as far as workers going into those fields, and we need to make sure that we have the workforce to continue that growth, particularly with the investment of whether it's the clean drinking water, broadband access, the roads and bridges that we're going to be building, and then the work that's going to come off of that.
And so what are some of the ways that we need to make sure that we are investing in our workforce and so that we are going to have those skilled workers available, not only to fulfill the goals of the Infrastructure Act, but also the needs of our employers and manufacturers?
Some of it's been what's been said today. It's about creating pathways and making sure that we're creating good pathways and letting people understand that these professions are there for them and they have access to them. Part of it's through pre-apprenticeships, part of it's through apprenticeships, part of it's through workforce development, job training programs, workforce development boards around the country. We really have to make sure that we're understanding and we're intentional about it. And I also feel very strongly that we need to bring companies to the table as well, more companies to the table, to explain to us what exactly they need for their workforce.
Mm-hmm. And that leads me into my next question about community colleges, of which I am proud to host 2 of the 14 that are in Pennsylvania. And I will tell you, the partnership between employers and manufacturers and these community colleges is nothing short of phenomenal. I hope I get to show you around them. What we have seen here in the Lehigh Valley is that the community colleges can quickly pivot to design programs to meet the needs of employers, manufacturers, and the like. And it happens on a regular basis. And they can do that very, very quickly in a way that a 4-year school can't necessarily do. But of course, community colleges need funding. so that they can develop those partnerships that you spoke of. So we did, in the WIOA Act of 2022, authorize a $100 million community college grant called Strengthening Community Colleges Training Grant. And I'd like you to just comment generally on based on your experience of the importance of community colleges and their ability to expand their capacity to develop short-term training programs.
Yeah, I've visited dozens of community colleges in my time as Secretary of Labor and traveling around the country, and I see in a lot of communities, a community college is the largest employer, is the opportunity for people to get better skills and opportunities for training and grant certificates and programs like that. I think that, when I talk to governors as well, I talk about, in some cases, depending on how the funding goes, the importance that states need to continue to fund community colleges. And, one of the disappointments with Build Back Better was that there was $100 million in there for community colleges and advancement of community colleges. And unfortunately, that went by the wayside. And many of the community colleges in America partner with the major corporations in America to train up and to create workforce development programs for those employers. So I think that the need for investment in community colleges is a public-private partnership as well. In some parts of this country, some of the largest benefactors or the largest donors to community colleges are actually employers to skill up workers.
Yeah, and I think you make a point that I try to make all the time, which is this isn't just about the students and it's not just about the schools, although both of those are very, very important, but it's really about building our employers' capacity to take on more and to perpetuate this Made in America attitude that we have and that I'm very happy that we have. On a more personal note, before I yield back, let me just say, you have another chance to come to Music Fest in my district later this summer. I hope you will avail yourself of that, and we would be happy to welcome you. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Keller.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Secretary, Americans are facing a shortage of baby formula. One of the reasons for the shortage was a recall on formula produced by Abbott at its Sturgis, Michigan plant. The Wall Street Journal has reported that OSHA received a whistleblower complaint all the way back in February of 2021 about issues at the Sturgis plant. OSHA passed this complaint to the Food and Drug Administration, which apparently did not act upon the information. However, I understand that Abbott conducted an internal investigation and found no evidence to corroborate the whistleblower complaint. So the question I have, Mr. Secretary, is did OSHA follow protocol in its handling of this whistleblower complaint?
It's currently under investigation with OSHA still. I can't get too much into the investigation, but OSHA did follow up and has followed up.
So OSHA followed up, and they handled it all by the.
I don't have the details on it because I can't get into the investigation because it's currently under investigation. I just wanted to give you that. I can get more information for you later and just let you know what I can say publicly because I believe it's still an active investigation.
Okay. So OSHA is working on an investigation. Was the White House or the FDA alerted about the complaint when the Abbott plant was shut down a year later?
I don't have the timeline for you on that. I'd have to get that information from the White House. I don't have the timeline on that.
I mean, it's a pretty significant event, I would think.
No, it certainly is. Sorry. Yeah.
I would think that we would have those details. I mean, that's it resulted in critical supply chain shortages for families across our nation, and I would think we would have that information.
Yeah, and that's why the president knows exactly that it's scary for families and for mothers and new babies, and that's why the president, as soon as he got this information, launched Operation Fly Formula, invoking the Defense Production Act to address the issue, and certainly has been on top of the issue. I don't know when the president was notified on this, but I certainly know that the president's been very active in the response.
Well, it was the complaint was back in February of 2021. So, when did OSHA make you aware of the complaint?
I don't have that date.
Okay. Also, I just want to talk a little bit, since we're on the thing here of OSHA. There have been reports that during recent inspections, OSHA inspectors have been asking employers to provide documentation of employees' COVID-19 vaccination status. Do you believe these are appropriate requests in light of the Supreme Court's rebuke of OSHA's vaccine and testing mandate?
I wasn't aware of that. but certainly the Supreme Court, what the Supreme Court ruled was it was not a mandate that the Department of Labor, what OSHA was doing. It was a vax or test. It was not a mandate.
Okay, but do you think that it's appropriate for OSHA inspectors to be inquiring on employees' vaccination status for COVID?
If they're there for a reason or COVID-related issue, absolutely.
Okay. Even though the court said that,
The court ruling is completely different than OSHA going out and checking to make sure that workers are safe.
workers can be safe, but my point is, so the OSHA's allowed to go out and pry into people's personal medical records?
I'm not aware of what that is, so I'd have to get some specifics from
So you're not aware that OSHA inspectors go and ask questions that they're not authorized to ask by the courts?
Can you give me an example of a company that did too?
We'll make sure we get you that information, but my question is, and I would like an answer, do you think it's okay for OSHA to go out and ask any questions they want?
I don't know if it's
regardless
happening.
of whether they're permitted to do it by the courts or not?
I don't know if it's happening. That's why I just asked you if a company complains.
Okay. If it were happening, would it be okay for OSHA to go out and ask any question they would want to?
Again, it depends on what the violation or the question is and when the timeline was. Are we talking yesterday? Are we talking April of 2020?
Still happening.
So I look forward to following up with you on that.
Okay, absolutely. And you know, it goes back to the whole point that I guess I brought up a while ago when I talked to you last year when you were new on the job, and you know, whether or not you believed that people that operate businesses care about the well-being of the people that come to work every day. You know, I do. I worked in a factory. I knew that the people that owned the business cared about me, and as a manager later on and a person that ran that factory, I cared about the people every day. So I would hope that you believe that the vast majority of the people of America care about the people that work in their business. Do you believe that?
I believe that.
Okay, I'm glad that's a much better answer than I got a year ago. So
Yeah, I don't remember the question a year ago, but
the same question, but it took me 4 times to get you to say that. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate the question.
Thank you. The gentlelady from Connecticut, Ms. Hayes.
Thank you, Secretary Walsh, for being here today. I think my question ties into what Representative Wild was asking. We've seen a 12% decline in registered apprenticeships during the COVID pandemic, and with the unprecedented investment in infrastructure that Congress has made, your department has requested increased in funding for apprenticeship grants in fiscal year 2023. Can you describe a little bit about what is included in the plan for this funding and what your strategy is to expand apprenticeships to support the demand that is brought on by the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act?
Yeah, quite honestly, we've been working, looking at communities that have not had opportunities, people that have not had opportunities to get into these industries in the past. So we're looking at, as far as the like construction trades, creating opening doors to make sure that we get more people of color and women into access those numbers. The numbers are low in some cases in some of those areas. Some parts of the country have done a really good job of expanding those opportunities, like Oregon and Oregon's tradeswomen, and some places need to do better jobs. So we're looking at creating opportunities, expanding those programs, particularly around the pre-apprentice side of it. As I mentioned earlier, I don't know if you're in the room, but we talked about pre-apprentices and creating a pathway into an industry that people might not understand that industry can be for them. So we're working on that side of it, and working with community colleges and other places.
Thank you. I've heard you talk a lot about apprenticeships in construction, but as you well know, that careers in precision manufacturing, green energy, healthcare, information technology, these are also high-demand careers that are expanding. The department's budget also requests $100 million for a new sectoral employment through career training for occupational readiness programs to support training in these growing industries.
Yeah.
What is your vision for this sector program, and how do you believe this investment prepares Americans for a competitive workforce?
Well, I think, you know, one thing the pandemic taught us, and what we're seeing now in the workforce, is people leaving jobs, looking for better paying jobs, looking for better opportunities. And quite honestly, these other areas that we're looking at is creating a pathway into the middle class for people and creating a good, strong career that people can get in these different areas. And that's what we're focused on. And that's what I think that, you know, we should be thriving for, and that's what American companies should be thriving for, to get better prepared, more opportunities for people into these workforces. You know, the last 30 years we've been focused on college, and in some cases, young people have had the opportunity, they've missed different industries, and we have a real opportunity to put people into different industries.
I appreciate that, and I hope that I hear you talk a lot about colleges and partnerships. The sooner we can introduce young people to these programs, as soon as high school, for career readiness and expansion, it's well worth it because generally the decision is made before they graduate what types of careers they want to pursue. And to your point, people switching careers, a March study found the majority of people quitting their jobs did so because they felt the pay was too low, they lacked opportunities for advancement, or they felt disrespected at work. Reports show that the healthcare, hospitality, and retail trade industries are experiencing the highest rates of turnover. How will your apprenticeships be a pathway for Americans seeking different careers and better pay opportunities, especially among populations that are disproportionately impacted by the pandemic?
I mean, I think in some cases, the federal government, the Department of Labor should be a pass-through, meaning that we need to be working with workforce development boards around the country. We need to be working with local mayors and governors and communities, local communities. I don't think we should be telling communities how to spend their money or what careers are out there. We need to be working with them. And this needs to be an all-of-government approach. This needs to be all-of-community approach. And I think that if we're thinking that the Department of Labor is going to solve all the challenges in front of us in America, that's not the case. We need to be working with people on the ground that understand it. When I was the mayor of Boston, if the Secretary of Labor came in and told me how to run my city, I don't think I'd be too welcome to it. But if they came in to offer support on how to workforce development people, I would welcome that input.
I'm glad to hear you say that because while we do need the support of the federal government, I can tell you that preparing people for jobs that do not exist in the communities where they live is not a productive strategy. My district is a very different district. We have lots of manufacturing towns. We have agricultural communities, small farms, greenhouses. So our needs, precision manufacturing, are very different than some of the needs of other parts of the country. So that's what I hear 100% of the time from business owners, industry, that we have all these people, but no one has the skill set that we need for the jobs that we have available. So I think that those types of partnerships are incredibly valuable. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlelady from Iowa, Dr. Miller Meeks.
Thank you, Chairman Scott, and thank you, Secretary Walsh. I hope you're not getting too tired. We're in the middle of a job crisis, and I think that we all know that. There are currently 11.4 million unfilled jobs in America, and the labor participation rate is not at the level it was prior to the pandemic. And the constant refrain that I hear from employers in my district is they can't find workers who have the skills, and even if they don't have the skills, they're willing to train if they can find people to fill those jobs. And aside from the administration's focus on the outdated registered apprenticeship system, which doesn't meet the needs of most employers, what steps is the department taking to alleviate the shortage of skilled workers and respond to employer needs?
Thank you very much. I think the first and foremost, just to kind of put this in context, the challenges that employers have today isn't new. The challenges employers are facing today, and that it's kind of highlighted or magnified because of what we've gone through as a country over the last 2 years with workers and pandemic and people getting sick and dying. And I think that, the investments that and again, I can't speak too much of what's happened at the Department of Labor in the past, but our focus moving forward is really creating a pathway. I think as a country, we've focused on just college, as I mentioned a minute ago. We haven't made investments in skilled trades. We haven't made investments in expanding trades. And what we're doing at the Department of Labor is really is creating more opportunities for registered apprenticeships. We're encouraging entrepreneurship. We're encouraging workforce development, job growth. We're encouraging making sure that we make these investments. The companies in Iowa, in your district, we need to be having conversation with them about what they need out of job training for workers in the community.
Yeah, I would wholeheartly agree that collaborating with employers rather than looking to penalize employers is and having been an employer, I can say that what we're going through now is very vastly different than what we've gone through before in the past in looking for workers. And some innovative programs were launched in recent years to help improve opportunities and outcomes for disadvantaged youth. One of those programs, the Job Corps Scholars Program, allows Job Corps eligible youth to enroll in career and technical education programs at their community colleges to learn in-demand job skills. How did the department utilize this program during the COVID-19 pandemic to help young people continue their education despite all the challenges they faced in the midst of the pandemic?
Well, the problem that Job Corps had during the pandemic is the same that our schools and colleges had. You know, a lot of these folks, a lot of these kids were sent home to learn online. Colleges were shut down, learning online. And the difference is that getting kids back into Job Corps, I think we've lost a little bit of the loss of some of our kids coming back into Job Corps. Right now, I want to say we have about 12,000 people in person. We have another 20,000 people online. My role is to get everyone back in person at Job Corps, and I want to realign the Job Corps program. I think there's a huge opportunity being missed in this country right now with 57,000 people going through Job Corps every year. We should be making sure that those folks, by the end of their time at Job Corps, whether it's a year or 2 years, that they're partnered with an employer with a job. And I mean, it just makes sense. So, Job Corps, in similar cases to schools and high schools and colleges, have went through the same challenges.
When Assistant Secretary Parker appeared at the Workforce Protection Subcommittee on May 25th, I asked him if OSHA has an estimate of how many taxpayer dollars were wasted in pursuing vaccine and testing mandate. He was unprepared to answer my question, but I'm hoping you might be able to provide an answer. Do you have an estimate?
No, I mean, again, the Department of Labor did not put a mandate out there. What we did was we went for a rulemaking on process on vaccinations or testing, which meant that and the Supreme Court voted down, so we know that. And so that's gone now, that's beyond there. But we weren't spending money on vaccinations in the Department of Labor. What I wanted to do was create that vax or test option. It was not a mandate.
So I'd hope, though, however, you would commit to providing the committee with information on how much was spent on a vaccine and testing program and
yeah, if there's dollars spent to it, I'll get it to you.
So, thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'd like to talk to you a little bit different about step therapy. I'm a physician, former director of the Department of Public Health, also military veteran. And so I want to talk about step therapy and how it relates to the ERISA health plans. I know the burden that's placed on providers by extended prior authorization stuff, such as step therapy, which is essentially a failed first requirement. And it certainly leads to people failing therapy, going to the emergency room, and being hospitalized when they were on a medication that was successful for them. It requires patients to try different medications and treatments before they can access the right treatment, even if they had the right treatment in the past. It can lead to burdensome delays of care, severe and even irreversible damage to patients, which is why I'm a proud co-lead of the Safe Step Act, along with my colleagues, Representative McBath on this committee, Dr. Winstrup, and Dr. Ruiz. Our bill takes care of patients first and considers patient medical history by providing a transparent plan to provide an exception process for patients. Over 30 states across the nation have passed very similar laws to the Safe Step Act, including Iowa. These laws apply to state-regulated plans, namely marketplace plans and many fully insured plans. They do not apply to self-insured employer plans, which are governed by ERISA under the Department of Labor. My question is, do you commit to work with Congress to eliminate the burdensome delays in care caused by prior authorization by helping us implement a solution like the Safe Step Act?
Yeah, let me get back to you on, let me work with your team on that. I'm not as familiar with that as I should be at this particular moment, but we'll work with you on that.
We would love to work with you on that. So
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back my time. Thank you, Secretary Walsh.
Thank you. The gentlelady from Washington, Ms. Jayapal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Walsh, it's great to see you. The last time you appeared before the committee, I was very grateful to hear you express your strong support for my domestic workers' Bill of Rights, which would extend essential protections to nannies, house cleaners, and home healthcare aides who have been on the front lines of so much and yet left out of our civil rights protections, as you know. Domestic work has changed dramatically in recent years, and it's really growing at a rapid rate. Secretary Walsh, when was the last significant update to federal labor law as it applies to domestic work?
I believe it was roughly 50 years ago. Something that's as comprehensive as the proposal you have filed in Congress. We have not looked at this, and there's a lot of different other areas that we have not looked at in 30, 40, 50 years when it comes to labor law.
Thank you. And, you know, when we think about it, there's an estimated 2.2 million domestic workers employed in private homes to provide care for children, elders, and disabled individuals and house cleaning services. And these workers, who often work alone, can be subjected to sexual harassment and workplace health and safety hazards without any recourse, and some still don't earn overtime pay. For example, Etelbina Hauser is a Seattle house cleaner. She's had 3 separate male employers expose themselves or proposition her. And unfortunately, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which protects against sexual harassment in the workplace, only covers employers with 15 or more employees, leaving Ms. Hauser with little legal recourse. Secretary Walsh, can you explain how a National Domestic Workers Bill of Rights, such as what I've proposed, would extend anti-discrimination and other workplace protections under federal law to benefit these domestic workers?
I mean, I haven't read the whole bill, your whole bill, but I know that when I was in the legislature in Massachusetts, we had a similar piece of legislation that went out there, provided lots of protections for workers' rights, for immigrant workers that are in this country. It extends benefits on some of the sexual harassment that you just talked about. Also, some of making sure that workers are being paid fairly, their wages aren't being stolen. And I think that, certainly when you think about 50 years from the last time we did it, this bill is long overdue, and hopefully that, I guess I can't advocate for legislation, but I certainly support this legislation. I know the president and the vice president supports it as well, and I know that there's labor organizations, and quite honestly, I know there's some employers in the country that support this legislation as well.
That's right, exactly right. Secretary Walsh, this year I submitted an appropriations request for DOL to fund the establishment of a hotline for domestic workers to anonymously report harassment, abuse, and other workforce hazards and exploitation and get connected to relevant resources. Do you think it's important, and why do you think it's important for such a hotline to exist for domestic workers?
I think a lot of times workers are afraid to come forward. They're afraid to report atrocities that they're facing on the job site. And I think having that ability to be able to call in so that we can properly go out and inspect to make sure that workers are being treated fairly is fine. We get many, many calls in the Department of Labor on a daily basis and a monthly basis and a yearly basis, whether it's in wage and hour, OSHA violations. People are afraid to report. They're afraid to lose their job. And quite honestly, people should not be afraid to report something, whether it's a domestic violence action on a job site, whether it's a safety violation on a job site, and we need to make sure we create a safe space for people to be able to report whatever they want to report.
Well, your support is going to be really crucial as we move through the appropriations process, so thank you for that. The home care workforce was truly on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic and provided this critical care that enabled people with disabilities and seniors who were the most vulnerable to the virus to avoid congregate settings that often saw high rates of COVID-19 infection. But home health workers are paid only $13.81 an hour on average. That's roughly half of what the average U.S. worker is paid. And benefits, as you know, are often very poor or non-existent. What role, if any, does the department have in expanding this often low-paid workforce and improving the recruitment, retention, and advancement of such a critical workforce?
I mean, I think one of the roles we have, or I have as secretary, is advocacy. I think that, this can be addressed in our own contracts through our budget process. I think we have to work with the states. I think we have to work with the nonprofit providers. I think we have to work with the organizations, the unions that are in this work. I think that that's one of the biggest things we can do. I mean, this is also a crisis, not just underpaying workers in these industries, but that means cutting back on the appropriate care that our loved ones are getting in these facilities. So I think it needs to be kind of an all-of-society approach, if you will.
Secretary Walsh, I really appreciate all your work and service to our country and to the workers of our country. And Mr. Chairman, my time has expired. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from Utah, Mr. Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Walsh. In recent sub-regulatory guidance from the Employee Benefits Security Administration, EBSA, sets concerning precedent of the department choosing which investments are inherently appropriate or inappropriate in the ERISA retirement plans. Recent news articles have quoted EBSA officials justifying issuing such guidance to avoid notice and comment rulemaking because there was not enough time. Secretary Walsh, does DOL believe that it's authorized to issue guidance in lieu of engaging in notice and comment rulemaking when it believes there is an evolving regulatory landscape?
Are you talking about the cryptocurrency?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we made a recommendation because we were concerned about employees having 20% of their retirement savings put in cryptocurrency. And I think that our role is to make sure that we're protecting the rights of American workers and the investments going in. And since we've made that determination, we've seen lots of losses in the cryptocurrency space.
I guess the question is, though, do you feel DOL is qualified to make certain guidance without the input of the experts in that industry or around that industry?
Well, I think anytime that to my knowledge, anytime that our folks at EPSA have been making any type of either whether it's a rulemaking process or a recommendation, we take very seriously having conversations with the industry professionals. So it's not just something that's randomly done. We do have those conversations to make sure we're not making a rule, we're not making a determination based off of a personal feeling. We should never do that. We should always be talking to the field experts in what we do.
Well, my understanding is that the engagement of the field expert is the notice and comment rulemaking process, correct?
That's the rulemaking process.
Okay, so it seems that we did not go through that process. Maybe I'm getting this wrong, but did they go through the traditional notice and comment rulemaking process and making the decision on this investments?
I believe that we're looking at potentially going through a rulemaking process moving forward on the industry as a whole, but this was a one-off, if you will, investment that we want to let investors know that we had major concerns about it. We didn't tell them they couldn't do it, but we told them we had major concerns about it.
Okay. A 2017 Harvard study estimated that under the IRAP proposal, the number of occupations commonly filled through apprenticeships could nearly triple from 27 to 74. That number of job openings filled through apprenticeships could expand eightfold up to 3.2 million, and that occupations ripe for apprenticeship expansion could offer 20% higher wages than traditional apprenticeship occupations. The Trump administration created an industry-recognized apprenticeship program to expand apprenticeship programs. It was working with more than 130 new programs developed in a little bit over a year. And most of those programs were in healthcare nursing, which is now experiencing massive labor shortages that threaten people's health and lives. Why did the administration cancel these programs that could offer desperately needed education for healthcare workers?
First and foremost, they weren't good programs. They were duplicate programs from the apprentice program that we have currently. They were not industry proven. And I think about when we think about expanding apprenticeships, we're expanding the apprenticeships that we currently have in this country that have been successful for a long time. I've heard a couple people here say today that our apprenticeships are old and they're not working right. No, they're absolutely working right. We're creating good pathways, and what we want to do is take the apprenticeship programs we have in our country right now and expand those. So we didn't need a duplicate set of rulemaking to get around the laws.
So in other words, there were not 130 new programs developed in an industry that we needed development in, health and
those. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, we're talking about health, the healthcare industry, and 130 new programs were developed in a little bit over a year. Are you saying that was not a successful process?
It was not a successful process, but we're looking at doing this industry-wide. So when we think, I'll give you an example. One is an example of nursing. We're going to have in the next 10 years, we're going to have a shortage of nurses in this country. We have a real opportunity to make investments in, I mean, I don't know if you call it apprenticeships, but creating pathways into nursing programs. We're seeing it with the trucking industry, supply chain trucking industry. We cut back on the timeline to create a registered apprentice program with trucking. We have 100 companies now that have signed up that are working to deal in the supply chain issues in our country by doing expanded registered apprenticeship through trucking.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'll yield back.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman, and for being here, Mr. Secretary. I want to start by picking up on what Ms. Miller-Meeks was talking about and just see how bipartisan this issue of step therapy is. 2 of my 4 kids have Crohn's disease, and they're 28 and 26, and they were diagnosed at 11 and 9. So we've been going through this for a long time, and I'm aware personally of the hurdles that health plans, including employer plans, impose that can limit patient access to care. Patients and advocates in this space have shared stories of patients undergoing surgery, even requiring a total colectomy because of delays in care caused by step therapy. And these findings were underscored recently by a study among pediatric IBD patients that demonstrated that even the presence of prior authorization requirement on a formulary increased the chances of a serious adverse event like hospitalization by 13% within 180 days. So as you know, most of us Americans get our insurance through our employers. And what I want to ask is that, will you work with us in Congress, with patient and provider community leaders, to make improvements to ERISA plans to ensure that patients get access to needed care and avoid the devastating consequences of patients getting sicker needlessly because the insurance plans make them try things that are cheaper but don't work before getting the treatment they need? That's what we'd love to do. And I'm telling you, you're going to love this issue when you.
Well, the short answer to your question is absolutely. I mean, I think anytime that we can work collectively together to create better opportunities for people with their insurance, with healthcare, whatever it might be, with mental health services, certainly we'd be foolish not to have those conversations about how we can try and work together. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Another thing that I've been excited about is that the president asked you and Vice President Harris to lead the White House task force on worker organizing and empowerment. I'm really grateful for the initiative and for your leadership on it. On February 7th, the task force issued a report that included nearly 70 recommendations to promote worker organizing and collective bargaining for federal employees and for workers employed by public and private sector employers. So can you give us an update on this? What's next? What steps has the department taken since the report to implement the recommendations? And how can we be helpful to advance this important objective of the president's?
Yeah, first, thank you for that. First and foremost, we're working across 8 departments and agencies, or cabinets, I should say, more so. Some of it's through the Good Jobs Initiative. Some of it's having direct conversations with other cabinet members. There is a report due, I want to say another 6-month report due sometime in August, and my office is working, Lynn Reinhardt from my office is working to help put that report together, working very closely with the Vice President's office and other liaisons in different cabinets across the board. I mean, there's different levels of involvement here that's going on in looking at what we can do. So we can get you more concrete in the report that's going to be out. I want to say it's August. We'll have a full comprehensive report of what's happened to date.
Well, thanks. We're very supportive of that work. I also want to focus on the persuader rule, which requires employers and their labor consultants to report on activities to persuade employees about how to exercise their rights to union representation and collective bargaining. The task force recommended that the department, and I'm quoting here, review its rules and policies on persuader reporting and take all appropriate actions to strengthen its rules and enforcement to ensure maximum reporting of persuader activity, and that it work with the Office of Federal Procurement Policy to develop a mechanism for ensuring that contracting agencies are aware of persuader reports filed by federal contractors and for ensuring compliance with the executive order, which is number 13494. So, this is really important. What steps has the department taken to ensure that persuader reporting rules is strengthened and enforced, given how much union busting is going on out there?
Certainly, OMS's role is to advance the stated U.S. public policy that we're moving forward here on. We do not have at this time a rulemaking process. It's not on the rulemaking agenda, but OMS is looking at all the reporting requirements out there, both on the union side as well, the reports of unions, and as well as the reports of any activity that is persuading or trying to push people away from collective bargaining, having their free and fair right to organize.
All right. Well, thanks so much. Thanks for your service, and I think my time's expired. So, Mr. Chairman, you yield back.
Thank you. The gentlelady from Tennessee, Ms. Harshbarger, for 5 minutes, after which we'll take a 5-minute break.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Walsh, for being here today. I want to ask a question about farming and wages. The H-2A program uses the AEWR to prevent an adverse effect on the U.S. workers. And I hear from my constituents in East Tennessee constantly that they cannot find local workers anywhere, even when they advertise at the $13.89 adverse effect wage rate. In recent comments to the 2019 and 2021 wage proposals, ag employers have asked that the department analyze whether the adverse effect wage is even needed because there's such a shortage of domestic workers. Would the department be willing to do that before finalizing their most recent proposal, sir?
So I was just talking, so I apologize, I was just talking to my team behind me. It's in the rulemaking process, so I don't have any updates on it, but we are in the process of, we just announced it the other day, I think, on all the H2 programs. We've begun the rulemaking process, so what we'll be doing is taking public comments on it, and I certainly would love to, my office will talk to your team, but you and I should probably have a conversation about this as well and how it impacts your district.
Okay, that'd be great. I appreciate that. And what I want to do now is just turn to the independent contractor model for a second. Recent Bureau of Labor Statistics surveys have noted that independent contractors across the board overwhelmingly prefer their work arrangements, and that's at a 79% approval. You know, in the trucking industry, for example, Americans choose the independent contractor model because of the economic opportunity it provides and the empowerment to select the conditions like, for example, wage and hours that suits that particular person's lifestyle. What would you say to hundreds of thousands of owner-operators in trucking who, despite choosing to be independent contractors, could lose their businesses immediately upon federal enactment of a restrictive IC test, sir?
One of the things, just real quickly, when about 8 months ago, we had a meeting at the White House with the trucking industry, and the Independent Trucking Association was there. And one of the things that they said was their concern was that the independent truckers weren't being paid the way they used to be, and that they were being undercut in the fact that they own their own truck and they own their own rigs, that they weren't there. So what we wanted to do is strengthen that opportunity. Any process that we do in independent contracting is not to put companies out of business. Anything that we do for independent contracting should be about protecting workers' rights, but also protecting the independence of companies that want to be independent contractors.
Well, we know that this administration really is pushing unionization and federal control over the workforce, regardless of what their preference is. So, you know, saying you want to protect the workers, but yet, you know, that's due to unionization, that's a no-go. Being your own boss or being unionized, that's the decision these truckers are having to make, and they don't want to do that. They want to be their own boss. They want to set their hours. They want to set their wage. If they're woefully underpaid, that needs to be looked at. But they shouldn't be told, well, in order to get this payment, you have to be unionized. I don't agree with that, do you?
Well, I haven't said that, and that's not the case. So if companies, and I've been very clear in the very beginning, if people choose they don't want to be part of a union, and independent trucking is a whole different situation. But if companies, if employees at a company want to join a union, they should have the right to. If they don't want to join a union, they should have the right to do that as well. It should be based on the employee, not the employer.
Well, I agree that they should have the choice to do one or the other. And I don't ever want to take their rights away for the American dream, and that's to own your own business and be your own boss. And with that said, Chairman, I yield the balance of my time.
Thank you.
The gentlelady's time has expired, and we'll take a 5-minute break, and we return in 5 minutes. Committee will come to order. And the gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Stevens, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our incredible Labor Secretary for taking our questions today. Before we dive in, I did want to take an opportunity to flag some concerns coming out of Michigan's 11th District regarding the Department of Labor's notice of proposed rulemaking on Wagner-Pfizer Act employment service staffing requirements, something that you know well, Mr. Secretary. Your home state, like Michigan, has operated under federal demonstration waivers with the ability to set their own staffing requirements since the 90s. And I know this is an issue that you're waiving very carefully. And I just want to let you know, sir, that I look forward to submitting comments and continuing this conversation with your office as we work to solidify a final rule that allows for states such as ours to maintain their successful local standards of service for workers and job seekers, something that in Michigan worked very well during the pandemic. Now, Mr. Walsh, I'd like to discuss the decision from Oshkosh Defense to move their awarded $6 billion contract to build the next generation of electric vehicles for the United States Postal Service to a totally new non-union plant in another state instead of having UAW members in Wisconsin carry out this lucrative contract. We have seen the pitfalls that happen when some automakers look to reduce their labor costs by building their EV manufacturing facilities elsewhere, where right-to-work laws allow companies to shortchange their workers on wages, benefits, and workplace safety standards. This egregious decision is one of the reasons why I introduced the Union Auto Workers Job Protection Act. My bill would require bids and contracts to build motor vehicles for the federal government to stipulate in which plants motor vehicles will be made or assembled. If a contract awardee wants to move production, they must get written permission from the executive agency and provide same-day notification to impacted labor unions when they seek this permission. So, sir, would you mind just speaking to how policy like this can work to reward employers who are doing right by their workers?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think anytime that we can have policy that supports not just workers, but supports communities that have historically had companies like that in their district. And I think that, as we think about expanding manufacturing in the United States of America, we want to make sure that some of these, like parts of your district and other people's district who is on this podium today, that they benefit from the manufacturing that used to be in their communities years ago. And I think it's not a net gain for America, moving an industry from one part of America to another part of America. It actually hurts the community that's in. So I think anything we can do to encourage more, keeping companies invested in their community that they're in, but also expanding those opportunities in other parts of the country are important.
Yeah, well, thank you. And Mr. Secretary, the Labor Management Reporting and Disclosure Act requires employers and anti-union consultants to report arrangements involving direct and indirect activities to persuade employers on how to exercise their right to organize. So these activities, as we know, are significantly underreported. And while there were over 1,125 union organizing campaigns in 2021 alone, research shows that employers hire consultants in 75% of these campaigns, and the Office of Labor Management Relations Standards received only 166 reports documenting such arrangements. So I'm just kind of wondering what's going on there. What steps is the department taking to improve employer compliance with their reporting obligations in such ways?
We're looking at making sure that there is a requirement for companies, just like there's a requirement for labor to file reports. And a lot of it is that the Department of Labor, OLMS, doesn't have the enforcement ability to enforce the law. So we really push to make sure that these reports are filed, whether it's anti-union persuasion rules, if that's the law, or labor forms. Unions have to file the forms as well. We do everything we can to make sure these forms and these reports get filed.
Well, thank you so much for that response, sir. And I'd also like to note that penalties for violations of reporting requirements are currently non-existent. And so with that, Mr. Chair, I'll yield back, but I'll also thank the Secretary for mentioning our work on the Rescue Act in his opening statement to save the multi-employer pension plans. Thank you for your leadership, sir.
Thank you. Now, my distinguished colleague from Virginia, Mr. Good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Walsh, for being with us. In your testimony, you talk about how you sort of bemoaned the fact that only 10% of American workers are unionized, which I would say is about 10% too many. You also say that it's a great priority of this administration to pass the PRO Act, to get more employees unionized. But if you look at the PRO Act and what it would do, it would force more workers into one-size-fits-all union contracts, subject more workers and job creators to union harassment, stifle workers' rights, increase union strikes. The American Action Forum found that employers could face more than $47 billion in new annual costs if the PRO Act became law. As you know, federal law already protects employees' rights to organize. But the PRO Act would reform U.S. labor. When we make reforms to U.S. labor laws, we ought to help workers, not just union bosses. The PRO Act would infringe on the right to workers and employees, hurt the economy by making it more difficult, more costly to invest in the American workforce. It overturns, as you know, right-to-work laws in 27 states. Of course, you've already said this morning that you're against right-to-work. It forces workers to pay millions of dollars from their hard-earned paychecks to labor unions, even if they don't want to be represented by a union. Of course, you probably also know that over the last 10 years, a couple $1 billion has been taken from member union dues to go to left-wing groups to help Democrat causes. The PRO Act would require employers to hand over their workers' private personal information to union organizers, including home addresses, cell phones, landline numbers, personal email, and more, without the consent of the workers. It would take away workers' rights to secret ballot in many circumstances, impose a biased card check scheme, which workers could be unionized without the union winning a secret ballot election. New penalties up to $100,000 could be imposed on small businesses for unfair so-called labor practices, and which would potentially close thousands of businesses that are just trying to come back after the government crushed them during the COVID supposedly mitigation strategy, bankrupt many small business owners. To say that we want to get more companies to unionize, more workers to be unionized, do you believe that the good of an organization, do you believe the good of an organization is in conflict with the good of its employees? Are the good of an employee and the good of an organization in concert or in conflict?
They shouldn't be in conflict. They should be very much together.
Okay, the union mentality pits an us against them mentality, employee versus union, instead of a concerted mentality where they're working together. In your opinion, when an advancing employee, someone who gets hired and they're an employee and they want to work up the chain, if you will, they want to advance their careers, when do they become part of the problem because they become part of management? And therefore, we need union to protect them from the company.
Well, before we get there, I don't agree with your assessment of unions in the way that you put it out there, that unions are bad and they're bad for business and they're bad for community.
Well, I think that you and your administration, Democrat majority, has demonstrated that you have contempt and disdain for employers and job creators and businesses, and you believe if left to their own devices, they would exploit and abuse and harm their employees. So therefore, we need these costly union organizations to protect them. So when an employee advances into management, do they become part of the problem just because they are part of management now?
Yeah, my recommendation.
Or should employees aspire to become part of management and to rise up within the organization?
My recommendation to you, Congressman, is I would have a conversation with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and ask them if the Secretary of Labor is anti-worker, anti-business. You should ask that question. I think the answer you'll get is surprising.
In addition, also your testimony really focused on the fact that we need to spend more money. You said that there's the American Rescue Plan has $260 million in it to promote equitable access to unemployment compensation programs. We've got 11 million open jobs in this country. One of the greatest contributing factors to the failed Democrat policies, the majority party, on our economy is the excessive spending on unemployment. Where did all the workers go? We've got 11 million open jobs. I have people close to me who work as employment consultants trying to help people find jobs, and these people are suddenly telling them in the last year and a half, hey, don't contact me until I stop getting paid not to work. We've grown the welfare state. We've grown the dependency state. How can you possibly say we need to make it easier for people to access unemployment insurance with what's going on in our country today?
Well, I think where the failure came with the workforce development right now that we're dealing with was the last administration not having a plan for the pandemic, either going into the pandemic or coming out of the pandemic, and there was no plan by the last administration. And President Biden inherited a plan that he needed to get people back to work, and in his first 13 months, 14 months of being President of the United States of America, 8.7 more million people are back to work that weren't to work the day he got sworn in as president.
How can you possibly say in your testimony that every dollar paid in unemployment benefits translates to $2 to boost the economy? How in the world does that? So we borrow money to pay people not to work. You're saying that helps the economy.
Well, I didn't say that in my testimony, but what I
I'm reading from your testimony.
But if
studies have shown that every dollar paid in unemployment benefits translates to
let me answer
$2
the
to
question.
boost the economy. Page 4.
If you look at the facts and figures of what it is, the investments, that's what all the experts are saying. The investments back into our economy. I mean, your constituents benefited from that were out of work and don't have work today. So I'd recommend that we try and help constituents all across this country, including
Thank you,
yours.
Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from New Mexico, Ms. Ledger Fernandez.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Walsh, for being the Secretary during the time when we've had the greatest job growth of any president and in history, at the same time that we have brought down the deficit. So this has been both a fiscally responsible administration as well as one dedicated to increasing jobs in America. I also want to thank you for the work you've done in terms of increasing wages of our workers and protecting our workers, because that's what we're about. We're about increasing the money that our working families get to take home, as well as creating opportunities. I appreciated your emphasis on the manner in which we are creating opportunities for our working families. I want to talk a bit about the concept of protecting our workers. I know we have money in the budget, have you seen, for protecting minors. As you know, and this isn't something of importance to me because of historical mining and the lack of protections that we did historically for uranium miners. These workers, many of whom are Latino and Native American, toiled away for national security, but then suffered from cancers and other serious illnesses. We did pass the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act and the Energy Employees Occupational Illness Compensation Program Act, but unfortunately, both of these laws left out many who suffered, and that includes uranium miners who worked after 1971, as well as core drillers and DOE remediation workers. We know that these workers fell ill precisely because of their job. Secretary Walsh, would you agree that it's important that the government provide assistance to these individuals, just as it does to others who worked in the uranium industry?
Yeah, I think we have to be very supportive and helpful in any way we can. And just to your earlier point about some of the safety, mine safety, we're seeing an increase in fatalities in mines this year. We had a meeting with some of the major mining companies in America to talk about sharing best practices moving forward. We want to try and get ahead of this because we have seen an increase of fatalities. And then obviously when you think of the other diseases, black lung, silica, all the things that we're dealing with, those challenges always remain there.
Thank you very much. I have the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act of 2021 to make sure we capture all of these uranium miners who are now receiving compensation. I also then want to turn to another, since we're on miners and other energy industries like coal and that have and oil and gas that have basically kept the lights on at home. They've fueled American business and innovation for decades. But as market forces shift, the landscape of energy generation, they also deserve opportunities, and we want to diversify our economy and grow local, good-paying union jobs. And I really appreciate your budget request of $100 million to provide employment and training assistance to workers in communities facing job losses related to the extraction of fossil fuels or energy production. I similarly urged appropriations to include robust funding for this program in fiscal year 23. What's the department currently doing to assist workers in these communities?
I mean, I think as we think about the transitioning, one is making sure that we're getting prepared to, even in a faster pace, transition workers from the fossil fuel industry into other industries. And part of that is through our workforce development. Part of that's through the efforts of pre-apprenticeship, apprenticeship programs, and also working very closely with the White House in the Department of Energy and Department of Commerce as we transition out of these industries.
Right, and do you see these new jobs as also being good-paying union jobs as they might have been good paying jobs in the fossil fuel.
Well, I think they need to be. I think that when you think about these industries, I think that when people are transitioning from one industry to another, we can't transition somebody from being a coal miner who's works hard every day, goes down, 600 feet underground, 4 miles out in a tunnel, and then all of a sudden, when their industries and they expect them to be paid less money working at a solar plant. I mean, we have to make sure these are good paying jobs in the green economy.
And how would continued funding of the programs that you have help serve these communities and these workers?
Well, I think that we have to continue to fund these programs and then at some point actually look to expand some of these programs as well, because as we think about dislocated workers, we're going to see larger numbers as time goes on. I mean, as with these industries, as we get greener and cleaner, we're going to start to see these industries changing faster. So now is the time to lay down the foundation for that and really focus in certain parts of the country where mining is a big issue and making sure that those, like West Virginia, making sure the workers in West Virginia are not left with nothing, that they have something to really think about raising their families. You're talking intergenerational families that have been working in these industries.
Thank you, and I really did appreciate you going to one of those orphan rallies where we will have good-paying jobs as we clean up those environments. So thank you very much, Secretary Walsh.
Thank you.
Thank you. The gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Manning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important hearing, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being with us today and for your patience. Secretary Walsh, during your discussion with Representative Bonamici, you said that we need to address the issue of child care, and you also said that we need to address the issue of immigration. I'd like to ask you about both of these issues. So first, immigration. Let's step on that third rail together. We passed 2 great bills in the House on immigration, and we've been working on comprehensive immigration reform, which I believe is critically important because our immigration system is so out of date and it doesn't address the needs of our country. So can you elaborate on what you meant when you said we need to address immigration?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And when you talked about third rail, immigration should not be a third rail. When you think about in our country, folks that are here undocumented, creating a pathway to citizenship would help us with filling these jobs that are unfilled, because we quite honestly don't have enough people to fill these jobs. We also have students that come from other countries to get educated in America in our college universities. And when their time is done here, if they don't get a visa program, we kick them out. And no other country in the world would do that. By educating people, they would keep them there. And every employer in business I've spoken to in America, or most I should say, big employers, big companies, are all like, we need immigration reform. So this should not be a Democrat-Republican issue. This should be an American economy issue. And I think we need to think about it. Rather than fool around every year on expanding H-2B visas and H-2A visas and kind of getting a couple workers in here temporarily, those industries, I get calls from Democrats and Republicans on the H-2B program all the time. And those industries that they're talking about are some of them a year-round industry, and they don't have workers in those industries for a whole bunch of reasons. Quite honestly, some people aren't going into those industries. So I think having comprehensive immigration reform with a good pathway, with it also dealing with the border, and President Biden has talked about that, that's the path forward.
Thank you so much. And in my district, I have talked to business leaders and business owners, from farmers to manufacturing companies to people who are looking for very high-skilled workers, and we cannot find enough workers. So I really appreciate your mentioning that issue and explaining so carefully what you meant by that. And my office is ready to work with you on those issues because we think they're so critically important. Now I want to turn to the child care issue. You mentioned in response to Representative McBath at one point that at one point during the pandemic, you were afraid we wouldn't be able to get women back into the workforce, and you said, women are critical to our economy. And you discussed with Representative Bonamici the importance of addressing our inadequate child care system. And I know from talking with child care providers in my district, and particularly, I remember a meeting I had with some Head Start managers in my district who said that there is a severe shortage of child care workers, in large part because the pay is so inadequate. In fact, many child care workers actually qualify for SNAP benefits, and they need these benefits to make ends meet, and that is absolutely unacceptable. Many of the workers also lack professional development opportunities that would allow them to increase their skills and develop a career path that would help them get into higher paid jobs. Can you talk about what the Department of Labor is doing to address this important issue?
Yeah, it's one of the issues that we're looking at when we talk about pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship programs and creating pathways into more industries. Childcare is one of them. The problem is also always going to be, until we come up with a better system, the pay, the salary for folks. And what happened during the pandemic, a lot of people left the industry, not because they wanted to, but because the industry wasn't there. It evaporated, it disappeared. And when the industry came back, a lot of those workers found better paying jobs because they were doing the job because they loved the job, not because they were getting paid in the job. And I think that, reevaluating, and we had to do a pre-pandemic, quite honestly, but reevaluating what childcare looks like in America and the cost on families, that President put forth a bill that I want to say any family that earns $150,000 jointly would pay no more than, or less, would pay no more than 7% of their salary to childcare. That makes sense. So I think that if you talk to industry, business leaders, they'll all say childcare is one of the biggest obstacles families have, and people have to get employees back into work.
And I assume you'd feel the same way about universal pre-K?
Yeah, I mean, as mayor of Boston, we brought universal pre-K into the city of Boston, and it was really the people that benefited from universal pre-K were low-income families that got their kids into school. And universal pre-kindergarten is, if you look at the studies of child development and brain development, you will find that the families that have the means and middle-class income and two-parent structure, young people hear more words and they're more prepared for school. Families that don't have that, little kids that don't have that, they're not prepared. You have universal pre-kindergarten. Now we're preparing everyone. And the studies show that the success rate of graduating high school and onto college or some type of secondary education or even a program is so beneficial. And we saw it in Boston, we saw it in New York City, and where you have universal pre-kindergarten. Not everyone has to take advantage of it, but it's tremendously helpful. Forget the family, forget the businesses, for the little kids.
Thank you. My time has expired. I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you. The gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. I really appreciate it, especially. We are definitely struggling in my district with the labor shortage. I don't care if it's nurses, manufacturing, restaurants, it's across the board. I can't even pinpoint it to one specific industry. And the comments that I get back from my district is, you in Washington are out of touch with what's going on. And I think part of that is because of the data that we give, and we're not giving the data context. And sometimes we make these quotes. Biden will say, our plans and our policies have produced the strongest job creation economy in modern times, in addition to 8.3 million jobs in my first 15 months in office. It's a record. And you'll say, we remain focused on empowering all of our workers to seize the opportunities in a growing economy by working to improve job quality and job access all across the country. And it sounds good, but it's just not trickling down, and it's not working. And I can share with you, at least in my community, in my district, you have Janet Yellen saying that I don't think we're about to lose control of inflation, right? I think the issue is, how can the administration possibly try and take a victory lap on the economics when we know that there are nearly 3 million workers excluded, right, from the unemployment data? So pre-pandemic or whatever, let's say it was 100, then we drop down to 30, then, okay, we take a victory lap because we're up to 60. We're still 40% off the mark. What is, I mean, how do we take a victory lap on that? I'm just struggling with that.
Thank you very much. First of all, I don't think the president is taking a victory lap, and I think he should take a victory lap.
I would strongly disagree, because I've heard from members in this committee say we should, celebrate what we're doing.
I mean, there's definitely been some successes, but I think the fact that, and we acknowledge, the president acknowledges this, I acknowledge this, that we still have inflationary pressures that are out there. People in your district are facing it. People in this city are facing it. People in my old city as mayor are facing it. There are challenges. Certainly, we're seeing the president reducing the deficit. I think it's $1.7 trillion, which is great for the bottom line for the federal government. But we still have challenges with Ukraine and the war going on in Ukraine and obstacles. So I think that, again, when I say that I don't think the president's taking a victory lap, I think that, we have to continue to collectively, where we can, bring down the pressures at home.
I appreciate that. And what do you feel about, the question is, when will this administration stop this madness and end the public health emergency and reinstate work requirements to get the people back to work? I mean, at the end of the day, we infused a ton of money. I'm not here to argue whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, but we printed a ton of money into the economy, right? Average full-time minimum wage, right, is $1,257 a month. Full-time median is roughly $3,500 a month. With all of the spending, all of the programs, all of the incentives to keep people out of the workforce and on the couch, it's $3,100. Listen, people are logical, especially with gas at $5 a gallon. Listen, I'd rather stay on unemployment and not put gas in my car because it makes logically more sense. How is this a sustainable future? Because all of these people aren't paying taxes. And remember, the government doesn't produce anything. We need this tax revenue. We have roughly 4 million people hired today on unemployment. How is this a sustainable future?
Well, actually, our unemployment number is the lowest it's been since the 1970s.
But you and I both know what that unemployment number doesn't count, and that's the people who are actively not seeking work. There are 4 million more people on food stamps right now today. So if you want to account for our job opening has gone from increased by, I'm trying to find the number here, 40%. We still have our job openings is huge. So, and I think it has a lot to do with the pandemic and the social programs that we're putting out there. And what's frustrating is we can't ignore this, and nobody ever talks about this.
Let me just quickly respond before we get shut off here. One thing that in my budget, in the budget that was in front of the Congress, is really thinking about workforce development, job training, expanding apprenticeships. And we want to do is create, again, I talked about this all day today, and I'll continue to talk about this, I talk about it all the time, is creating partnerships with industry and businesses about how do we get some of those folks that are not engaged in the workforce.
Industry is ready, and they're paying. Industry is begging people again, I'm not talking the $15 an hour busboy. I'm talking about nurses. I'm talking about $100,000 a year jobs.
I was in Rochester Hills talking to the business leaders in Rochester Hills with my friend Brian Barnett earlier last year and talking to businesses. And I was in, not too long after that, I was in Detroit with Mayor Duggan talking about the same, different businesses, but
I would
the same.
encourage you to come to my district.
I will.
And I say that because, are you in agreement that we need to start ending some of this public health emergency programs?
I don't know. I mean, I think we have to be careful with that because it's a need. There's a need in America for some of them. But I think if we have to identify the.
I mean, clearly there's no crisis at the border. We don't have a public health crisis there. Why do we have a public health crisis
Well,
here?
I'll come to your district. We'll have the conversation. How's
I
that?
appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Jones, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Walsh, for being here, for your patience, and for your work supporting Americans as they recover economically from the pandemic. As others on the committee have highlighted, in May, the unemployment rate fell to 3.6%, a testament to the Biden administration's work vaccinating the country and getting people back to work. But as you also noted in your written testimony, unemployment does not fall evenly across the American population. Women continue to be unemployed at higher rates than men. Black and Hispanic Americans are unemployed at higher rates than white Americans. For formerly incarcerated individuals, an unemployment rate of 3.6% has little bearing on their experience in the labor market. As we heard from Tracy Scott of the National Urban League, in a hearing before this committee earlier this Congress, Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, individuals returning from incarceration had an unemployment rate of 60 to 75% 1 year after their release. And overall, formerly incarcerated persons faced an unemployment rate of 27%. We incarcerate more people than any other country on earth, and we fail to make the investments needed to provide those individuals with stable employment opportunities and secure economic futures. I applaud the Labor Department's request for additional reentry employment opportunities funding and the administration's Second Chance Opportunities Initiative, but would respectfully suggest to you that that is not yet enough. The administration proposes serving approximately 20,000 individuals during program year 2023 through the Reentry Employment Opportunities Program. This is a small fraction of the 640,000 individuals released from incarceration every year. So that leads me to ask, how does the department decide which of the hundreds of thousands of individuals released from incarceration every year gets targeted for REO services?
Thank you very much. First and foremost, we don't run at the Department of Labor all of the reentry programs, as you know, that happen throughout the country. In some cases, you have good reentry programs, or I shouldn't say good, adequate reentry programs, if you will, in states that do it. I certainly think that we need to come up with, there's an opportunity here, in my opinion, in America to really capitalize on 600,000 people coming out of incarceration and creating opportunities and pathways into the workforce. And I think that we need to do a better job of that as a society, not just as a federal government, but as local government. I've seen these programs that work that are very successful, and I've seen these programs that don't. We have some successful programs from the federal government working through our American Job Centers. We're actually in some penal systems in America doing some reentry work, and I think that we need to do more. So certainly I would welcome any additional money that Congress wants to allocate to this budget, to me, at the Department of Labor to do this work. I know how to do this work, and I know how we can build partnerships.
Okay, Mr. Secretary. So do I understand you to be saying that the reason you're only able to target 20,000 of the approximately 640,000 formerly incarcerated persons being released every year is because you need a larger budget to be able to serve more people?
No, I think you said that. You said we didn't ask for enough money, so I'm just agreeing with you.
I don't recall saying that you didn't ask for enough money. I'm trying to understand, how do you choose the 20,000 of the 640,000? And I'm respectful.
I think the numbers are bigger than 20,000. Number one, I think that's a talking point or a bullet point in what we're doing. We're working right now. We just launched a program with the White House on reentry and trying to do more with reentry programs working. I think we have a unique opportunity with this bipartisan infrastructure bill to create a pathway into industry that you might not see on paper through the building trades and through other industries. So a lot of this stuff, you're not going to see the numbers. I think a number is a number. It's what programs can we set up and what industries can we actually create pathways into for folks that are returning citizens. I don't know if you were on the Zoom earlier today, but I talked about a program called Operation Exit. That's a returning citizen program in the city of Boston. 92% of the folks that go through that program are African American. Most of them were incarcerated. Most of them had penal. Everybody had a record. There's some great success if you do a real targeted program. That won't show up on any. That won't show up on any chart anywhere. But that's a really strong program.
Okay. You also referenced other federal employment assistance programs, such as those provided by DOJ and DOE. How do you coordinate with your REO assistance with those agencies?
We're coordinating now through the Good Jobs Initiative in a lot of these different places that we're working very, very closely with these different agencies, making sure that we're on the same page when we talk about creating a good pathway into a good job, whether it's around equity, inclusion, whether it's about reentry or programs like that.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Fitzgerald.
Mr. Secretary, thanks for being here today. I appreciate it. Thanks for hanging in there. Since COVID, there's obviously a higher sensitivity to the gathering of health information, especially from by employers of employees. So I don't know how much truth it is. I know it's out there, but OSHA's been looking at asking for employers to submit injury and illness data And I think that, there are some rules, or there's certainly, it looks like some directives that are going to be coming down soon on that. And I was wondering if you could give us an update, or if you know anything about where we're at on that, because I think it's going to be controversial, obviously.
Yeah, no, it came up earlier today. I think it was Wisconsin as well. I'm not aware of it, so I was just quickly asking behind me if we knew about that. I will have to look into that. I'm not aware of us asking any new information, new questions, particularly around COVID or around mandates and things like that. I am completely not aware of that. I will have an answer by the end of the day, and we will get in touch with you on that.
That sounds great. Let me just shift quickly. Representative Crow and I are also members of small business, and we just had a bill that we worked on together and has passed the House already. It deals with industry-recognized apprenticeships. In my district, over the last year or so, and I know it's been discussed almost ad nauseum today, the labor shortage stuff, but it seems that specifically kind of tech colleges throughout the nation have been doing a good job of kind of pairing up with industries to develop strategies in actually developing curriculums, and in some instances, even employers funding those apprenticeships by paying X amount of dollars per day for anybody who's throughout the entire period of time that they're in training. So I would encourage you, and I know you've got involvement in this and experience in this. I'm just wondering kind of where Department of Labor is on this stuff, and if you guys, I'm actually trying to tell you that I think there's some good things coming out of Congress right now related to this, and would love to hear kind of your take on apprenticeships and this private sector pairing that's going on.
Yeah, first and foremost, I would love to talk to, if you want to put a group of small businesses together from your district or from Wisconsin, I'll either go there or we can do a Zoom. I'd love to talk to them about what they're experiencing and what their needs are, number one. I think that's important. Number two, we're looking at expanding, and we talked about it a few times, different times today, so I won't repeat too much of it, but apprenticeship programs into other industries. Outside of, historically, we think of construction as apprenticeships. We don't think of IT. We don't think of retail. We don't think of these different sectors, maybe even restaurants potentially, where we have a shortage of restaurant workers. So we're looking at expanding registered apprenticeship programs into the Department of Labor, and we're also looking at continue to, I wouldn't say expand, but create more pre-apprentice programs so that companies that make investments in apprenticeship programs, rather than getting somebody that goes into an apprenticeship program, does a year in there and realizes, oh, I don't want to be here, that company just lost that investment, if you will. So is there an opportunity for us to have more pre-apprentice programs to get a feel for people going into an industry so that they're getting paid a stipend, but they get a chance to kind of get a feel for the industry before they make that full commitment to the industry? So I would love to, I'm serious about this, even if it's a Zoom, we don't have to visit, but let's set a Zoom up with your companies to talk about what they want, the needs that they have, the needs that they want to see, and how they can be successful.
Sounds good. We'll take you up on that.
Right.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Merban.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you very much for this opportunity. Secretary Walsh, I want to thank you for your patience, and I also want to take this opportunity to thank you for your visit to Northwest Indiana, where we advocated for the bipartisan infrastructure bill, along with the steel industry, along with the United Steelworkers. That being said, I also want to take this opportunity to advocate my strong support for the Section 232 policies in order to protect our steel industry from overcapacity and all the downstream industries within my district of Northwest Indiana. That being said, there's been an increase in reshoring of domestic manufacturing in the United States. I just want to give you an opportunity to be able to talk about the Bipartisan Innovation Act and the value of that to the workforces for the future.
Yeah, I think that a lot has been discussed here today. We've talked about inflation several times. We've talked about workforce development several times. We've talked about issues around training and workforce development and job training, apprenticeships. And the opportunity in front of us with the Bipartisan Innovation Act is really about bringing real, strong manufacturing jobs back to America. We invented the chip. We invented the computer chip and everything that we have, the computer, the TV in front of me, the two phones in my pocket, the iPads in my desk, all of that stuff needs computer chips, the cars we drive, everything we have. and we don't create them in America. And the Bipartisan Innovation Act would allow us the opportunity to create these computer chips back where we invented them, so why not build them here in America? It would help us, not with inflation today, but long-term would help us with inflation. Creating pathways into good jobs in Indiana and Michigan and Wisconsin, all these places that Iowa, all these different congresspeople that we hear today, Virginia, talking about their industry. Every one of those cities, including Massachusetts, has a part of the state that is not the same as it was 50 years ago because the manufacturing base left. We have such an opportunity to bring back good jobs, manufacturing back to the United States of America. The Bipartisan Innovation Act is probably, I would argue, I might get myself in trouble for saying this, this potentially is bigger than the infrastructure bill that was passed by this Congress this year, because you're talking about long-term. We'll build new roads, new bridges, clean drinking water, broadband, but we're talking about creating a pathway for good-paying jobs in communities all across America, but we're also talking about being less reliant on foreign imports.
Can't agree with you more. Have been advocating for the Innovation Act consistently with those same thought processes, and to even create the ecosystem. As I talked about, Gary, Indiana produces steel. Car manufacturers, they wait for those chips. They wait for those semiconductors. And when they stop production, those workers stop working in my community, then the steel workers stop working. That's why I have been advocating for that bill from the very beginning and then for the future. I want to be at the seat at the table to make sure that Indiana, Northwest Indiana, is one of those innovation hubs, creating the next future job for the next future generations. I also have a next question about whistleblowers, if I could. Secretary, Congress and the public have benefited from whistleblower testimony. In fact, a study that has found that whistleblowing is highly effective at detecting improper and illegal activity, and that whistleblowers were responsible for 43% of the fraud detection. The voice of whistleblowers has led to improved safety in the workplace protection of workers' rights and helped improve the dignity of work. However, whistleblowers to the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, are not protected from retaliation and therefore take their information to the Securities and Exchange Commission rather than the FTC. Regrettably, whistleblowers from private companies are not protected by the SEC and currently have no protections. My question is, would the Department of Labor review the FTC Whistleblower Act of 2021, which creates a right of action for whistleblowers to have suffered retaliation for disclosing a violation of any law, rule, regulation, or order enforced by the Federal Trade Commission?
Yeah, my answer to that is let me look into see what jurisdiction we have, what we can do as a department. I'm not aware of it at the moment. I know somebody's scrambling behind me to try and get me a paper right now, but let me get back to you on that one.
I thank you very much. I appreciate what you're doing, and again, let's work together as we have in the past to make sure working men and women have a future and an opportunity to provide for their families.
And you brought up Gary, Indiana, Working Families Diner, great burgers in there.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
Gentleman, yield back. Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Bowman.
Go. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Good to see you here. Thank you for joining us today. I'm especially interested in how your department is supporting workers across the country in their efforts to engage in collective bargaining and unionization, especially given recent reporting about companies like Amazon spending millions on anti-union efforts. In January, your department put out a blog post about the work of the Office of Labor Management Standards and noted that OLMS would plan to relaunch a program highlighting the benefits of collective bargaining and cooperative union and employer bargaining relationships. So number one, can you provide an update on this effort and discuss why such a program is so important right now, especially in light of continued reporting on union busting by large employers like Amazon? And two, what are some of the challenges this program faces and what additional resources Congress can provide to support this vital work? And I got two other questions I'm going to try and get to, so try to be concise.
I'll be really fast. First and foremost, you know, the president, myself, support collective bargaining. We support workers' right to organize. There's been no secret about that. I've said that a couple times here today. And I think that, you know, the president filed the PRO Act that passed the House, that's over in the Senate now, and the president's encouraging the Senate to pass the PRO Act. But certainly OLMS we talked a little bit about reporting today, reporting kind of anti-union investments that companies have made. They have a legal obligation to do that. We don't have a lot of enforcement when it comes to making sure that those get filed. So kind of in a nutshell, I mean, I certainly support collective bargaining. I was at the AFL-CIO convention yesterday. I spoke there. I talked about the one thing. I'll be honest with you. I said to the unions, it's that it's not the responsibility of the president or the federal government to organize. It's their responsibility to organize, and they need to go out and organize. And it's our responsibility, I guess, in some cases, Congress to pass laws that might help unions. But right now, we don't have that.
Thank you. Nationwide, unemployment in the Black community remains over 6%, the highest of any racial group in the country. In New York, unemployment in the Black community was over 9% for the first quarter of 2022. We have to do better, as you know, to support Black workers in their ability to unionize and bargain collectively to get and keep high-quality, good-paying jobs. What is your department doing to support unionized employment specifically for Black Americans, especially in the context of high rates of unemployment?
Well, certainly, one of the things is in the Good Jobs Initiative, we're very focused on making sure we're creating a pathway into not just the innovation, I mean, the bipartisan infrastructure law, but all of the policies and some of the work that we're doing in the federal government as far as investments. Secondly, we're working across the line in places like Job Corps and other job training and our American Job Centers, making sure people have pathways into good-paying jobs. We have to be intentional about the way that we invest in workforce development programs, partnering with local authorities and creating the pathways. It's no surprise, it shouldn't be a surprise to any of us that the unemployment rate for the Black community is twice that of white, because historically has been. But the president has been very clear that he wants this moment in time, coming out of a pandemic, the investments that are being made, that we do it differently. And he's directed all of us to make sure this happens. And it starts with us, and it goes right down. We have to work with the private sector. We have to work with the local governments to make sure that this time is different.
Can you speak to any collaboration that's done either at the federal level or local level that you know of between the Department of Labor and law enforcement? The reason why I'm asking is because we've been doing a lot of re-entry work in our district. And what we're seeing is there's just such a lack of opportunity for people who are returning citizens, but also for youth who are returning citizens. And they may have not been incarcerated for long periods of time, maybe a day or so, but there's just a lack of resources in terms of their workforce development. Can you speak to some of the collaborations there and some of the investments that are being made there so that youth do not escalate to violence in certain circumstances?
Yeah, there is some collaboration, but I think there should be more collaboration. When I was in Boston, the mayor of Boston, my program that we talked about, Operation Exit, I worked very closely with the Boston Police Department, with the courts, and we put a lot of young people into a pathway, into pre-apprenticeship programs before they get in trouble. And I think that oftentimes if we wait till after an arrest happens or incarceration happens, it's almost too late for that person, because they have to do their time. When they get out, we have to try and catch them again. I think what we want to do is get on the forefront where somebody just gets into that beginning time of trouble, and how do we maybe work with probation and clerks in courts, so rather than put them in prison, we put them on a pathway to a job and give them that chance. Like you hear the stories of the old days that the judge would say, you go to service or you go to jail. Well, now the judge could say, do you go into an apprentice program or you go to jail? Give them that chance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Cawthorn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, you mentioned in your testimony that the pandemic also highlighted that more can be done to ensure that workers have timely and equitable access to UI benefits, and that fraudsters, particularly sophisticated international criminal rings, do not flood the UI system with false claims to wrongly acquire taxpayer funds, while creating further delays and barriers for genuine claims in need. Secretary, that brings up an interesting question not touched in any other part of your testimony that I can find. Can you answer two questions for me? What was the nature of the unemployment insurance system fraud, and what exactly was the scope of the fraud that you allude to?
I mean, the nature of the fraud was the amount of money that went into the system, and this was back with the CARES investment that was made in the very beginning of the pandemic, and we've never seen, to my knowledge, in any time in the history of our country, this type of fraud that happened. And part of it was because the rules that Congress put on the money that allowed people to access this money, and I support you for doing it, access this money easily. It just opened up a system that was wrong. Number two, you had antiquated systems all across the country. And in the American Rescue Plan, I want to thank Congress for allocating $2 billion because we've created the Office of Unemployment Insurance reform, and we're working with states all across the country, both Democrats and Republican governors, and investments in those states to fix those systems that are antiquated. And we have a system that's, quite honestly, that's a very old system, meaning computer systems all across this country.
Thanks, Secretary. I have another question on the same theme. There's an old saying, I'm sure you've heard it, that haste makes waste. I fear that the reckless spending over the last few years exemplifies that. The PPP program was absolutely right with outright theft. What steps were taken at the time to prevent fraud and abuse in the unemployment insurance program?
Well, we're working now. We're working through with target teams. We've gone, I want to say, 27 states. We've investigated the challenges that they've had and the breakdowns in their system. And what we want to do is make sure that this never happens again, and that we have a system that has strong integrity. Might be the wrong word, but we're going to need an investment from Congress, and states are going to need investments across the country to bring up their systems. Part of it is that we have 53 different systems in our country. The way our system works, we fund it through the federal government. A lot of unemployment, but each state is independent. And some of them are working on systems as old as 30 years old, computer systems. So we need to make investments in this system.
All right, let's move on. Staying on something that you seem to be quite proud of in your submitted testimony just before your comments about fraud, I believe you said the UI system in particular, the emergency unemployment compensation programs extended by the American Rescue Plan, provided life-saving benefits to American families throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. Milton Friedman once said that inflation is taxation without legislation. Inflation actually robs hardworking families of the fruits of their labor and deprives them of their spending power. Knowing what we know now about the links between inflation and government spending, just how likely is it that funds you are touting as providing life-saving benefits actually contributed to runaway inflation this administration has set loose?
Well, I think at the time that money, whether it was the CARES package, the $600 additional a week, or the $300 by Congress earlier in 2021, I think at that particular moment in time, you're living in that moment, and you have to take care of the constituents and the American people at that particular moment. I personally don't think it necessarily. I think I don't know if it added to inflation, but it certainly hasn't added to inflation to the point of 9%. But you also got to remember, in the context of that particular moment in time, American people were hurting, American people were scared, and we were still in the early days of the pandemic.
All right, Secretary Walsh, well, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlelady from Minnesota, Ms. Omar.
Thank you, Chairman. The USMCA included over $200 million to Ilab for technical assistance to help Mexico's enforcement of its new labor law. This funding can also be used for capacity building to monitor compliance with the new trade agreement. Secretary Walsh, what steps is Ilab taking to support the enforcement of Mexico's new labor law? And what steps are being taken to protect the rights of independent unions and workers?
Yeah, thank you. Back about a month ago, my Deputy Secretary, Julie Su, I mentioned this earlier today, was in Mexico, met with the labor minister in Mexico, and we have 4 labor attaches on the ground that are working on enforcement of this trade agreement. We have a 5th that will be coming forward. I was at the AFL-CIO convention yesterday, and I met with a worker that organized a union in Mexico for automobiles, and was very excited to be here in America talking about their organizing drive. So Ilab is working very closely to monitor that agreement to make sure workers are being protected, workers are being treated fairly, and making sure that's why I'm looking for an increase to help Ilab not just in Mexico, but around the globe to make sure that we're doing everything. We saw increases in child labor violations last year. I'm sure you saw the report, Congresswoman. The report is not a good one. It was the first time in about 10 years we've seen violations go up. And so we have some work to do on the international stage.
Thank you, Secretary Walsh. Since we are on the topic of trade, I wanted to know if your department has studied the consumer and labor impact of USMCA in certain sectors since it's been implemented.
Yeah, I work very closely with Catherine Tai. Our office works very closely with Catherine, the ambassador, and so there's a lot of different spaces that we work very closely together.
Yeah, I asked because I want to, take your focus to an article that was published in 2008, and it was late. The headline says how baby formula might end up as a collateral damage in Trump's war, Trump's NAFTA war. And so just wanted, you might not have the answer right now, but just wanted to see if there is sort of looking at some of these things, because this price was foreshadowing some of the trade factors that could possibly contribute to the current formula shortage that we are seeing. And I don't know if you could speak to any impacts that it might have had to the supply and market.
That's one I'd have to get back to you on.
All right, appreciate that. The Bureau of International Labor Affairs in the U.S. is government leading voice in strengthening the rights of workers internationally. One of these initiatives is the Labor Attaché program, which posts attachés in strategic U.S. embassies overseas to increase labor monitoring. Some of these countries include Vietnam, Colombia, and Mexico. Each aspect of this coordinated approach is vital to ensuring that U.S. trade policy benefits workers in the U.S. and abroad. Mr. Secretary, can you expand upon how this program and Ilab generally supported labor rights for foreign workers and their communities? And can you quickly explain how protecting and promoting such human rights benefits is beneficial for American workers and our economy at large?
Well, I think, one of the things that we're very interested in making sure in our Ilab office is that we have good, strong relations with governments around the world to make sure that workers' rights are being protected in those states, in those countries. But also, a lot of our own companies are working in those same countries. We want to make sure that we're not taking advantage of workers, even though they might not be American workers. We're working closely with them. And this is, I just came back from the G7 in Germany, where the 7 largest economies in the world. We sat down and talked about the labor atrocities happening in the world, and Italy and Germany, ourselves, we were all there talking. Japan was there. We talked about, Australia was there. We talked about really making sure we can continue to work together to support workers' rights around the globe. You're on mute, Congressman.
The gentlelady's time has expired, and the gentlelady's on mute if you're trying to say anything.
I will just yield back since I ran out of time. I did have a quick question, but thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
And I would advise the members that they have called votes. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I just had a couple questions. I know you've been here a long time, so thank you for that. Regarding mental health parity, the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act of 2008 prohibits group health plans sponsored by large employers that provide mental health benefits from imposing less favorable treatment limitations on those benefits than medical or surgical benefits. Mr. Secretary, ensuring that patients have access to mental health coverage and treatment is a priority for this committee. Many health plans and employers seek to abide by mental health parity laws, but find the department's rules on non-quantitative treatment limitations to be subjective and confusing. Despite receiving explicit directions from Congress outlining the information DOL must provide to plans, the department has yet to issue guidance illustrating how plans may demonstrate compliance with the law. DOL could more effectively advance mental health if it's focused on efforts on establishing clear guidance and compliance assistance instead of focusing solely on the noncompliance of the employers. Right now, DOL believes that every plan is out of compliance, which leads me to believe there's a problem with the what they're getting from the DOL. Can the committee expect you to release additional guidance in this regard?
Yeah, thank you for that. That's the first I've heard it that way, but let me be clear. I had a meeting with Secretary Becerra in my office because we're working with HHS on this 2 weeks ago with the insurance providers of the healthcare plans from the country, and I think that if that's the case, and it is, I'm not saying it's not what you just said to me, we need to be very clear on what's expected of insurance companies in America to provide good, strong, comprehensive parity when it comes to mental health and substance use. So the answer to your question is yes. I'll work with you, we'll work with everyone, and I'd love to, any information you have on that from companies saying that it's not clear information, I'd love to get that personally.
Thank you. As you know, we've talked in the last couple of weeks for obvious reasons with the tragedies about mental health, needs for more support services, more funding. But of course, the majority of people are covered by plans like this, and the more we can do to make sure that they are having access, whether it's online, or remote, or otherwise, I think will be a major part of this equation. So with that, again, thank you for your time. We have votes, so I'll yield back at this point.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, and I thank you for your consideration to the other members. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Castro.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Walsh, for your leadership in the department and all of your work at the Department of Labor. I was pleased to see the Department of Labor's June 10th guidance on preventing abusive recruitment practices of prospective workers in the H-2A and H-2B programs. Problems with the H-2 visa programs, as you know, are well documented, as numerous investigative reports have shown systemic exploitation of guest workers as employers are able to game the system when it comes to recruiting. Guest workers play an essential role in our economy, and it's critical that there be rulemaking to strengthen the protection for wages and working conditions and to ensure accountability of employers who abuse workers' rights. And so I wanted to ask you, does the department have plans to include H-2B reform in its agenda of regulatory actions?
Sorry, we're in the process right now of looking at our H programs, H-2B, H-2A, and you know we are having conversations. We did some strengthening of our H-2B worker requirements, worker protections, if you will, when we just allotted the 35,000 new visas, and we're looking at both the H-2A programs as we think move forward. So the answer to your question is yes.
No, well, thank you for that. And I appreciate it very much. And I know other members of the committee and other members of the Congress appreciate that. And in the interest of time, because I know people are trying to go vote, I'll yield back, Chair.
Thank you very much. And the gentleman from New York, Mr. Espaillat, recognized for 5 minutes. Gentleman from New York. Gentleman from New York.
Hello, I'm here. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to address these very important questions. My first question is really one that's very personal to me, as my first job as a young teenager was a summer youth job in the city of New York. And it gave me great opportunities and taught me skills like getting to work on time, dressing appropriately for the job, being job ready and positive at the job site. And so the evidence shows that that a significant percentage of young people that are involved in the summer youth job, like I was, will not engage in felonious action and will not be convicted of a felony. And a recent study has identified that high quality summer youth employment, like those in New York City and Chicago, focus on recruiting and supporting youth and employers and technologies to administer the programs and facilitate communications with stakeholders are very effective. So I wanted to ask you, what do you feel, how can Congress best support your agency's work to guarantee summer youth job programs across the country, high quality jobs, and what recommendations do you have for Congress to bolster the summer youth employment prospects for young people across the country?
Yeah, I have lots of opinions on that. Number one, I think that if Congress is going to pass anything like that, you need to talk to the mayors because that's where it's going to be carried out. You know, when as a member of the former member of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, a lot of people modeled their summer job program after the city of Boston. We employ roughly 11,000 young people a year in the city, both in the public sector and private sector. We need to have a component of that. You need to have a component of those summer job programs that the private sector is making investments in, and they're not going to complain about it. They actually like the program. New York has a good private sector piece of that. Boston has a great private sector. Louisville, Kentucky has a great private sector. And I think that, you know, when we think about these programs, summer job programs, it doesn't have to be all funded by public entities. It can be a public-private partnership. So I would suggest that before, as Congress is moving forward on any type of legislation or any type of investment, you need to get cities and towns at the table because those are the ones that are going to carry it out. It's not going to be carried out by the federal government. It's not going to be carried out by the Congress. It's going to be carried out by the local authorities.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that answer. My next question is Secretary Walsh, that ProPublica found that only 13% of jobless Black workers received unemployment benefits between April and June of 2020, compared to 24% of white workers. To address these egregious inequities, the department has begun distributing funding provided by the American Rescue Plan to help promote equitable access to state unemployment insurance systems. How do these equity grants allow states to reinforce their UI system and ensure workers to get the benefits they are owed if they become unemployed?
Well, I think a lot of what the pandemic showed in the UI systems around the country, shortfalls and pitfalls that these different systems have, and I think that I talked earlier about the fraud side of it. I think on the other side is accessing benefits. We're making these investments, but what's going to be needed is other investments, both on the federal level and the state level, to make sure that these systems that are in place in states, and when I say systems, I'm talking computer systems, make it more easier to be able to access the benefit, but also can allow the states to have better protections in place to make sure the people that are accessing the benefits are actually the person that's accessing the benefits. So I think as we continue to move forward in the reform of UI insurance, we're going to be making recommendations and working with states and territories around the country on this. The equity grants allows people the opportunity as well to create better access to these programs.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlelady from New Jersey, Ms. Sherrill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Walsh, a critical component of our workforce system is the registered apprenticeship system, which helps workers access high-quality, good-paying jobs while also assisting employers in filling high-skill positions. I was proud to co-sponsor the National Apprenticeship Act in both the 116th and 117th Congress, which will create over 1 million new registered apprenticeship programs. Given the success of the program, I was excited to see that the Department of Labor's FY 2023 budget request includes over $300 million for registered apprenticeship grants. Can you discuss the impact of registered apprenticeships on the ability of workers to access high-quality jobs, as well as their role in helping to combat the labor shortages currently affecting our economy? And can you also discuss the importance of the Senate passing the National Apprenticeship Act? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. The National Apprenticeship Act is a really important piece of legislation, and more importantly, an important piece of the puzzle for us as far as workers in America. I know that the chairman and the committee were trying to make sure that this moves forward, and potentially in the Innovation Act, would love to see that happen. Having any type of apprenticeship that we can move in this country right now, and expanding apprenticeship, registered apprenticeships, and expanding pre-apprenticeships is really going to be, I think, the future of our economy and economic success in America. So hopefully we can see not just this bill move forward, but even investments in apprenticeship.
Thank you. And a key factor behind the success of the registered apprenticeship system is the partnership between the labor unions, employers, and the workforce system. Unions play an important role in raising living standards for tens of millions of working families, and they also are crucial in helping Americans access high-quality job training and workforce development programs. As we work to expand the scale and scope of our workforce system, unions must have a significant role in developing and implementing these high-quality training programs. So I was proud to introduce legislation to increase labor representation on state and local boards, and I was excited to see this provision included in the House-passed WIOA reauthorization this year. Secretary Walsh, can you discuss the importance of strong labor involvement in our workforce system, and what steps are the Department of Labor taking to ensure that labor unions have a seat at the table in developing and implementing expanded workforce training programs?
Yeah, whether you like the building trades or not, and I'm just saying that for members of the committee, $2 billion a year is invested from the company, the management side of the aisle when it comes to organized labor into the building trades. The building trades of apprentice programs are the gold standard of apprenticeships, no matter who you talk to in the industry. And when I think about apprenticeships, some of these apprenticeships will be union, some won't be union. But what we need to do is make sure that the companies are investing in apprenticeships in this country. It can't just all be public investment. And in the building trades, there is zero public dollars in apprenticeships. And in some pre-apprentice programs, there's public dollars in pre-apprentice programs. So when you think about creating an apprenticeship, when I think about creating an apprenticeship program, number one, the apprenticeship program needs to work, needs to create a pathway into an industry. Number two, needs to support the companies that are looking for workers. And number three, what it will do, it will create a pathway into a good middle-class job for people that get into these different industries.
Thank you. And I think, as you said, our building trades apprenticeship programs are the gold standard. So ensuring they have a seat at the table in developing these programs is really important. Another key piece of our workforce system is the use of evaluations and evidence to determine what works best for job seekers and then fund those proven programs, which is why I introduced the Bipartisan Expanding Pathways to Employment last year to fund evidence-based workforce programs. And can you discuss the importance of evaluating programs and specifically funding and scaling those with the largest impacts on workers?
Well, I think first and foremost, anytime you have evidence-based practices, it shows it right there, that the importance of it. And I think that you will see through, and you've seen this already, that's why you filed the bill, the need for it and the need for the expansion. And I think that there's no secret that we need to continue to look in other industries as well and make those same expansions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. I hope to see you up in New Jersey soon, and I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you. The gentlelady from California, Ms. Steele, recognized for 5 minutes. And I'd advise you that there's no time left on the clock on votes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary, we are seeing the threat of work stoppages across the globe at ports. In Southern California, the United States' busiest and largest ports could soon also have a work stoppage in the coming days. If there was a work stoppage, the result would add fuel to the unprecedented supply chain crisis. Earlier this year, you supported one side over the other in a labor dispute. How are you handling this crisis due to the national and international implications? Do you think a work stoppage should be off the table for the International Longshore and Warehouse Union? the American people trust that you will be truly independent and put the well-being of the American people first?
Yep. Let me just, first and foremost, in your first comment, I didn't take a side in any dispute, number one, just to be publicly clear on that. And number two, I was in California on Friday. We met with the president, we met with the companies and the longshoremen, and today the company and the longshoremen union both sent a joint statement out saying that the contract expires July 1st. There'll be no work stoppage. They're going to continue to work through until they get an agreement. So they both put that public statement out today. So that fear is not an issue.
So that's not an issue.
No, today the company, the union and the company put a joint statement out today saying they're going to continue to negotiate through the end of the contract and continue the negotiation, even though they know the contract's going to expire July 1st. So there's no fear of a work stoppage or strike or lockout at this point.
Okay, then let's move on to AB5. California's AB5 proved to be a disaster, and its failed policy is now riddled with exemptions. Yet DC Dems seem to try their best to make that a national law. Following these policies is guaranteed to cause more harm to workers at the national level. Many occupations use an independent contractor model and want the flexibility it provides. I again ask you, why are you continuing to push for a failed policy in California that limits the flexibility and opportunity offered by independent contracting?
Yeah, I don't think what I'm not pushing a failed policy. What I'm pushing here is making sure that we truly have people that are independent contractors, are truly independent contractors, and they're not being misclassified as independent contractors when in fact they don't want to be. And there's certainly situations, and we're going to have these conversations as we move forward here in the coming months. And I look forward to working with your office on this and making sure that we're not making errors of the past.
Okay, well, you know what? This AB5 is really hurting the supply chain crisis and the ports, and especially in California. And this is not really helping for our crisis here. My constituents want transparency. Your recent regulatory moves have lessened transparency in the use of union funds. Do you feel the unions should ensure they are fully transparent with the dues taken from wages earned by the workers? Why did DOL withdraw the Form T1 rule on trust fund reporting for unions?
Because the unions already have an obligation to report to us, so it was a duplicate effort. All the information that was in the T1, you get that same information to the DOL. So it was just a duplicate report that wasn't needed.
Thank
The gentlelady's time has expired. She yielded back. And if there are no other members seeking recognition, I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Secretary, a lot has been said about inflation, and I think you said it was a global problem. Is it true that gas prices in America are high, but it's about $8 a gallon in Europe?
To my knowledge, at this point, yeah, it's higher. It's higher in Europe, and Europe obviously is far more dependent on Russian oil than we are here in the United States. But we're seeing this issue of gas, unfortunately, all across the globe.
And so our strategy needs to first put money in people's pockets so that they can deal with the global problem. A family of four got about $5,600 in stimulus checks. Is that right? Plus thousands more in $14 each. $5,600 in stimulus checks, thousands more in child tax credit, more in earned income tax credits, and reduced Affordable Care Act premiums. That put a lot of money in people's pockets to help them deal with this problem. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd characterize it as a lot of money in people's pockets, but it certainly gave people comfort during a very difficult time in the American history.
And when you're dealing with supply by dealing with the infrastructure, investments in ports, child care, job training, to put more people to work. And the Federal Reserve publishes the credit card delinquencies, which should be an indication of financial stress. Didn't the Federal Reserve over the last year publish the lowest credit card delinquencies and mortgage delinquencies historically?
Yeah, people have less debt today.
On the registered apprenticeship programs, if you don't, one of the advantages there is they're nationally recognized and high quality, and if you don't have the registered apprenticeships, you lose that. Is that true?
True.
And the ESG investments, is there anything that you're recommending that would require ESG or just make it permissible?
There's nothing, I don't think there's, let me get back to you on that one.
It's, you're not,
Oh, sorry, it's permissible.
yeah, I mean, you're not requiring.
No, we're not requiring, no.
Yeah. In OSHA, you're asking for more money. Is it true that right now you can only inspect each business about once every 100 years?
I think it's roughly once every 100 years.
There's a thing called training repayment agreements. Are you familiar with those?
A little bit.
What's wrong with those? If you'll get back.
I'll get back to you on that one.
Okay. Well, I'll yield back the balance of my time. We are getting very close to the end on votes. So at this time, pursuant to committee practice, materials for submission of the hearing record must be submitted to committee clerk within 14 days following the last day of the hearing. That's June 28th, preferably in Microsoft Word format. Only a committee member or the invited witness can submit materials. So, Mr. Secretary, I want to thank you for your participation today. There may be additional questions which I would request that you answer forthwith so that we can receive those, and we'll hold the record open to receive those responses. I remind colleagues that pursuant to practice, witness questions must be submitted to the majority committee staff within 7 days. Questions must be relevant to the hearing. I now recognize the ranking member for a closing statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, it's good to have had you fulfill your obligation today to help the committee in its obligation for oversight of the Department of Labor. You've painted a very rosy picture of this administration and its destructive policies, but we know that 83% of the country is dissatisfied with the direction the country's headed, so I'm not sure how you informed your opinion as stated today. Workers, businesses, retirees, and families are facing historic economic challenges. They're experiencing the worst 12-month increase in inflation in 40 years, kicked off by the Democrats' policies that rewarded people for staying home. Businesses are clamoring for more skilled workers, but the Biden administration is shuttering innovative solutions like the industry-recognized apprenticeship program. And you just mentioned the registered apprenticeship program that you all are pushing as having the gold standard. The gold standard for the registered apprenticeship program is a 43% completion rate. I don't know anybody who thinks 43% is a passing grade. Small businesses and independent contractors are seeking fewer regulatory burdens and more guidance from DOL to understand complex regulations. But your regulatory agenda and your budget request will give them the opposite. Listening to your answers to our questions, your so-called solutions for workers and businesses were more government programs, more grant money for bureaucrats to determine who gets a handout, expansive new laws like the PRO Act and Build Back Better Act, and tipping the scales in the favor of union bosses. Republican-led policies fostered an exceptionally strong economy prior to COVID. Republicans will continue to put forward solutions to reduce unnecessary regulations, to offer more Americans opportunities for skill development, promote job creation and higher real wages, and to improve the lives of everyday Americans. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and thank you, Secretary Walsh, for joining us today and for your leadership on behalf of workers. Your testimony has made clear that the administration is the most pro-worker administration in history. Since your administration came in, created the most jobs in 1 year in the history of the United States. Unemployment has declined. Americans have been getting better jobs with better pay. Moreover, our economic progress fares better than many of our partners. According to the International Monetary Fund, the U.S. economy will be larger at the end of the year relative to its pre-pandemic size than any other of the Group 7 economy. Our global advantage proves that President Biden's and congressional Democrat strategy is working. We invest in workers. Our economy can grow from the bottom up and the middle out. However, you know that work to secure economic stability continues. As we've heard today, lowering the cost of groceries, gas, and everyday goods is a top priority for both the administration and for House Democrats. We're just not complaining about inflation. We're trying to do something about the global problem that afflicts everybody here. And as we move forward, I invite my colleagues on the other side to join us in advancing legislation that will actually help workers and their families succeed. And so, Secretary Walsh, I look forward to our continued partnership and look forward to working together as we continue working for workers and businesses across America. There's no further business. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.